make people feel more understood than they expected. One of the most psychologically addictive things a person can experience is the feeling of being deeply understood. Most people walk through life feeling emotionally unseen, even around friends, family, or partners. They speak, but few people truly listen. They explain themselves, but others only wait for their turn to talk. This is why someone who makes people feel understood immediately becomes unforgettable. The frightening part is that this technique does not require charm, beauty, or status. It works because human beings are emotionally starving for validation. When you remember small details they casually mentioned, notice emotional shifts in their voice, or understand feelings they struggle to explain, their brain begins associating you with emotional safety. They start feeling a strange sense of comfort around you without fully understanding why. What makes this even darker is that people become emotionally attached to those who understand parts of them they hide from everyone else. The moment you describe an insecurity they never admitted aloud, or notice pain they thought nobody saw, their emotional defenses weaken. They feel exposed, but also relieved. It creates the dangerous illusion that you see the real them. This is why therapists, interrogators, manipulators, and seductive personalities all rely on deep emotional observation. The more accurately you understand someone's fears, desires, loneliness, and emotional wounds, the easier it becomes to influence them. Most people are not controlled through force. They are pulled in through emotional recognition. Someone who feels misunderstood by the world will often become deeply attached to the person who finally makes them feel emotionally visible. Reveal less emotion than you actually feel. One of the most unsettling forms of psychological power is emotional restraint. Most people immediately reveal what they feel through their face, tone, reactions, and impulsive words. Anger appears instantly. Excitement becomes obvious. Anxiety leaks through nervous behavior. Because of this, emotionally readable people become easy to predict, easy to influence, and easy to control. A person who reveals less emotion than they actually feel creates a completely different psychological effect. Their calmness becomes difficult to interpret. Others begin watching them more carefully, trying to decode what is happening beneath the surface. Human beings are naturally uncomfortable with uncertainty, especially emotional uncertainty. When someone cannot fully read you, their mind starts filling the silence with curiosity, fascination, and sometimes obsession. This technique becomes even more powerful during emotional situations. While others react impulsively, the emotionally controlled person remains composed. They may feel anger, attraction, jealousy, or disappointment intensely inside, but externally, they maintain control. This creates the impression of hidden depth and inner power. People often mistake emotional discipline for confidence, intelligence, or superiority. There is also a darker psychological side to this. When people cannot clearly tell how much they affect you, they often become more emotionally invested. Your lack of visible reaction forces them to search for emotional confirmation. They replay conversations in their mind, wondering what you truly felt, whether they impressed you or whether they matter to you at all. Many seductive, manipulative, and psychologically dominant personalities understand this deeply. The less emotional information you reveal, the more space you create for other people's imagination to consume itself trying to understand you. Speak slowly when everyone else rushes. One of the strangest psychological advantages a person can possess is the ability to remain slow in a world addicted to urgency. Most people speak quickly because they are nervous, emotionally reactive, desperate to be understood, or afraid of losing attention. Their words rush out before their thoughts fully form. Anxiety speeds up the voice. Insecurity fills silence too quickly. This is why calm, deliberate speech immediately changes the emotional atmosphere in a room. When someone speaks slowly while everyone else rushes, people instinctively perceive them differently. Slow speech signals emotional control, confidence, and composure under pressure. It creates the impression that your words carry weight and do not need to compete for attention. Human beings naturally associate calmness with authority because panic and speed are often linked to fear. What makes this psychologically powerful is that slower speech forces others to unconsciously slow down with you. It pulls attention toward your words. Instead of chasing the conversation, you begin controlling its rhythm. Even silence between sentences becomes emotionally charged. People start leaning in more carefully because your calmness contrasts sharply against everyone else's emotional noise. There is also something deeply unsettling about a person who refuses to become emotionally rushed. During tense conversations, arguments, or emotionally charged moments, slow speech creates psychological imbalance. While others lose control, the calm speaker appears grounded and difficult to intimidate. This often makes people second-guess themselves without realizing it. Manipulators, interrogators, leaders, and highly seductive personalities frequently understand this effect. They know rushed speech reveals emotional exposure, while controlled speech creates mystery and authority. The slower you remain under pressure, the more others feel that you possess something they do not fully understand. Stay calm when others seek your reaction. One of the darkest forms of social power is the ability to remain emotionally calm when people are trying to provoke you. Most human beings constantly seek reactions from others. Some want validation. Some want attention. Some want emotional control. Others intentionally create tension, disrespect, jealousy, or conflict simply to watch how you respond. Reactions give people information. The moment you emotionally explode, panic, over-explain, or desperately defend yourself, you reveal exactly where you are vulnerable. This is why emotional calmness becomes so psychologically intimidating. When someone expects anger but receives composure instead, it creates confusion in their mind. They lose the emotional control they thought they had over you. Instead of pulling you into their emotional storm, they are forced to sit alone inside it. That silence becomes deeply uncomfortable because human beings expect emotional energy to be returned. The unsettling part is that calmness often feels more powerful than aggression. Loud reactions may appear strong on the surface, but they usually reveal emotional loss of control. A calm person, however, appears emotionally disciplined, grounded, and difficult to manipulate. Even when they feel hurt, angry, or triggered internally, they refuse to hand that emotional power away publicly. This creates a strange psychological effect where people begin watching you more carefully. They wonder what you are truly thinking. They search your face for cracks, signs of weakness, or hidden emotion. The less reaction they receive, the more emotionally unsettled they often become. Highly manipulative personalities understand this principle well. They know that people become emotionally exhausted when their attempts to provoke, impress, or disturb someone fail repeatedly. Calmness does not just protect emotional control. It quietly shifts the psychological power in the room without saying a single word. Leave conversations before your energy fades. One of the most psychologically seductive things a person can do is leave before their presence becomes ordinary. Most people stay too long in conversations. They continue talking after the emotional energy has already peaked. They begin repeating themselves, oversharing, forcing jokes, seeking validation, or trying too hard to maintain attention. The longer this continues, the more their emotional impact weakens. Familiarity slowly replaces intrigue. A person who knows when to leave creates a completely different emotional effect. They exit while the interaction still feels emotionally alive. This leaves people with unfinished emotional momentum. The brain naturally dislikes incomplete experiences, which is why people continue thinking about conversations that ended too soon. Instead of remembering exhaustion or awkwardness, they remember emotional tension, curiosity, and presence. What makes this technique powerful is that absence intensifies emotional perception. Human beings often value things more once they are no longer immediately available. The moment you leave at the right time, your presence becomes psychologically amplified in memory. People replay your words, expressions, and energy long after the interaction ends because the emotional experience never fully settled into boredom. There is also a darker psychological layer beneath this behavior. Many emotionally intelligent and seductive personalities understand that overstaying weakens mystery. The more constantly available you become, the easier people emotionally adjust to your presence. Scarcity, however, creates anticipation. A person who leaves too early appears emotionally self-controlled, independent, and difficult to emotionally consume completely. This is why some individuals become unforgettable after surprisingly short interactions. They understand that emotional impact is not created through endless presence. It is created by leaving people wanting just slightly more of you than they received. Become emotionally unpredictable in small ways. One of the most psychologically addictive traits a person can develop is mild emotional unpredictability. Human beings are naturally drawn toward patterns because patterns create safety and predictability. When someone always reacts the same way, speaks the same way, and behaves exactly as expected, the brain eventually stops paying close attention to them. Familiarity lowers emotional intensity. Predictability becomes mentally comfortable, but rarely unforgettable. A person who becomes emotionally unpredictable in small ways creates a very different psychological effect. Their reactions cannot be fully anticipated. Sometimes they become warm unexpectedly. Sometimes they remain silent when others expect emotion. Sometimes they pull back slightly after intense connection. These subtle shifts force people to stay mentally engaged because the brain begins searching constantly for emotional certainty. What makes this so powerful is that uncertainty increases emotional focus. When people are unsure how someone feels about them, they often become more emotionally invested trying to figure it out. They replay conversations repeatedly, searching for hidden meanings, changes in tone, or emotional clues they may have missed. The unpredictability keeps their attention emotionally trapped. The disturbing part is that the unpredictability does not need to be extreme. In fact, small inconsistencies are often more psychologically effective than dramatic behavior. Tiny changes in attention, timing, energy, or emotional warmth create enough uncertainty to activate curiosity without triggering obvious alarm. The person begins feeling emotionally stimulating rather than emotionally stable. This is why many seductive and manipulative personalities avoid becoming completely emotionally consistent. They understand that human beings become addicted to emotional anticipation. The brain starts chasing emotional rewards more intensely when they arrive unpredictably. Over time, the person stops focusing on logic and starts focusing on emotional signals, constantly wondering what version of you they will encounter next. Master eye contact without staring too long. Eye contact is one of the most psychologically intense forms of nonverbal communication. Human beings reveal enormous amounts of emotion through their eyes without realizing it. Fear, attraction, insecurity, confidence, curiosity, and dominance often appear before a single word is spoken. This is why controlled eye contact can feel strangely intimate, unsettling, or emotionally addictive within seconds. Most people either avoid eye contact too quickly or hold it too aggressively. Avoiding it signals nervousness, insecurity, or emotional discomfort. Staring too long, however, can feel threatening, unnatural, or emotionally invasive. The real psychological power exists in the balance between the two. A person who maintains calm, steady eye contact without overdoing it creates emotional tension that feels natural, yet difficult to forget. What makes this so powerful is that eye contact forces emotional presence. During genuine eye contact, people feel psychologically exposed. It creates the sensation that someone is truly observing them beneath their social mask. This is why confident eye contact often feels magnetic. It silently communicates attention, control, and emotional awareness without needing words. The darker side of this technique is that controlled eye contact can quietly influence emotional dynamics. A person who holds eye contact calmly during silence often appears more confident and emotionally grounded than they may actually feel. Others begin projecting depth, mystery, or authority onto them simply because they remain visually composed under pressure. Highly seductive, manipulative, and charismatic personalities understand this effect deeply. They know that brief moments of strong eye contact create stronger emotional memories than endless talking. When combined with calmness, subtle facial expressions, and emotional restraint, eye contact becomes psychologically disarming. The most unforgettable people are rarely the loudest in the room. Often, they are the ones who make others feel intensely seen for just a few carefully controlled seconds. Make silence feel comfortable instead of awkward. One of the rarest psychological abilities a person can develop is the power to remain comfortable in silence. Most people fear silence because silence exposes emotional tension. The moment conversations pause, insecurity begins surfacing. People rush to fill empty space with random words, nervous laughter, unnecessary explanations, or meaningless noise because they are terrified of being judged, ignored, or emotionally disconnected. This is why someone who remains calm during silence immediately feels different. Their stillness creates a strange emotional gravity. Instead of panicking to rescue the conversation, they allow silence to exist naturally. This signals emotional confidence because only people who are comfortable with themselves can sit in silence without desperation. Human beings unconsciously interpret this calmness as emotional strength. What makes this psychologically powerful is that silence forces hidden emotions to rise to the surface. The longer silence lasts, the more people begin revealing themselves unintentionally. Nervous individuals expose insecurity. Emotional people begin over-explaining. Manipulative people become uncomfortable because they lose conversational control. Silence acts almost like pressure, quietly pulling hidden thoughts and emotions out of people. There is also something deeply intimate about comfortable silence. Most connections are built through words, but stronger emotional bonds often appear when words are no longer necessary. When someone can sit beside you quietly without creating discomfort, the brain begins associating them with emotional safety and peace. That feeling becomes strangely addictive because very few people create it. Highly persuasive and emotionally intelligent individuals understand the hidden power of silence. They know that nonstop talking often weakens mystery and emotional presence. A person who is not afraid of silence appears grounded, observant, and psychologically difficult to read. The quieter they remain, the more other people often reveal without realizing it. Never explain every detail about yourself. One of the most psychologically powerful things a person can do is resist the urge to explain themselves completely. Most people constantly feel pressured to clarify their intentions, defend their actions, reveal their thoughts, or make sure everyone understands who they are. This comes from a deep emotional fear of being misunderstood, rejected, or judged unfairly. As a result, they expose too much of themselves too quickly, leaving very little mystery behind. A person who does not explain every detail creates a completely different psychological effect. They leave gaps in people's understanding, and the human mind is naturally obsessed with filling gaps. When people cannot fully figure you out, they continue thinking about you long after the conversation ends. Curiosity grows stronger because uncertainty keeps the brain emotionally engaged. What makes this even more unsettling is that people often respect emotional restraint more than emotional exposure. Someone who calmly allows others to wonder about them appears more confident, self-contained, and emotionally secure. They do not desperately chase validation or approval. They seem comfortable with not being fully understood, and that alone creates an unusual sense of psychological power. There is also a darker reason why this technique works so effectively. The more information people have about you, the easier it becomes to predict your behavior, locate your insecurities, and emotionally manipulate you. Every unnecessary explanation reveals emotional patterns, fears, desires, and vulnerabilities. A person who speaks less about themselves becomes harder to emotionally control because others never receive a complete map of their inner world. Manipulative and highly seductive personalities often understand this deeply. They know mystery creates emotional fixation. The less people fully understand you, the more their imagination begins building versions of you inside their own mind. Let people discover your depth gradually. One of the most seductive psychological experiences is the feeling of slowly uncovering someone layer by layer. Most people reveal too much about themselves too quickly. They explain their entire personality, trauma, ambitions, opinions, and emotions within a short period of time because they fear being misunderstood or forgotten. But when everything becomes immediately visible, curiosity dies early, mystery disappears, and the mind stops searching for more. A person who reveals their depth gradually creates a completely different emotional effect. At first, they may appear simple, calm, or difficult to fully read. Then, over time, small pieces of intelligence, emotional complexity, hidden passions, painful experiences, or unexpected perspectives begin surfacing naturally. Each new layer changes the way people perceive them. The brain becomes emotionally engaged because it feels like discovering something rare instead of being handed everything instantly. What makes this psychologically powerful is that human beings value what feels earned. When someone slowly reveals deeper parts of themselves, people become more emotionally invested in the process of understanding them. Every conversation feels like another step into hidden territory. Curiosity intensifies because there is always the feeling that more exists beneath the surface. There is also a darker psychological side to this. Gradual revelation creates emotional attachment through anticipation. People begin building mental images and fantasies around the parts of you they still do not fully know. The unknown becomes emotionally addictive because the imagination fills empty spaces with intrigue, meaning, and desire. Seductive and emotionally intelligent individuals understand this deeply. They know that instant exposure creates short-term attention, but gradual discovery creates long-term fascination. The less immediately available your inner world becomes, the more emotionally valuable it often appears in the minds of others. Show restraint, where others seek attention. One of the rarest forms of psychological power is the ability to remain restrained in environments where everyone else is desperately trying to be noticed. Most people constantly compete for attention without realizing it. They interrupt conversations, overshare achievements, exaggerate emotions, seek validation online, or force their personality into every room they enter. Attention becomes emotional survival for them. The louder the insecurity, the louder the performance often becomes. A person who shows restraint creates a completely different emotional effect. They do not rush to prove themselves. They do not constantly seek approval, recognition, or reassurance. Instead of chasing attention, They allow silence, presence, and emotional control to speak for them. This immediately makes people perceive them differently because restraint feels rare in a world addicted to visibility. What makes this psychologically unsettling is that restrained people often attract more attention precisely because they are not fighting for it. Human beings are naturally curious about those who seem emotionally self-contained. When someone appears comfortable without external validation, others begin wondering what gives them that level of inner stability. Mystery begins replacing predictability. There is also a darker psychological side to restraint. The less emotionally reactive and attention-seeking you appear, the harder people work to gain your approval or emotional response. Your calmness quietly shifts the emotional dynamic. Instead of you seeking validation from the room slowly begins seeking validation from you. Highly charismatic, seductive, and psychologically dominant individuals understand this principle deeply. They know that emotional restraint creates perceived value. Constant self-exposure weakens intrigue, while controlled presence creates fascination. In many situations, the person saying the least emotionally is often the one controlling the atmosphere the most. Become difficult to emotionally categorize. One of the most psychologically disturbing things about certain people is that you can never fully figure them out. Human beings naturally try to categorize others quickly. Within minutes of meeting someone, the brain starts placing labels on them: emotional, cold, insecure, confident, predictable, weak, kind, dangerous, needy, dominant. These labels create a sense of certainty and emotional safety because people feel more comfortable when they believe they understand someone. A person who becomes difficult to emotionally categorize disrupts this process completely. They may appear warm one moment and emotionally distant the next, calm during pressure, yet unexpectedly intense when something matters deeply, quiet in groups, but highly observant, kind without seeming weak, confident without constantly seeking attention. This contradiction creates psychological tension because the brain struggles to place them into a familiar emotional pattern. What makes this so powerful is that uncertainty increases emotional focus. The mind naturally obsesses over what it cannot fully solve. When someone becomes emotionally unpredictable in subtle ways, people start analyzing them more carefully. Conversations replay in the mind, small behaviors become over-examined, curiosity slowly transforms into fascination because the brain keeps searching for emotional clarity that never fully arrives. There is also a darker side to this effect. People who cannot emotionally categorize you often project their own fantasies, fears, and desires onto you. They begin imagining depth, mystery, intelligence, emotional pain, or hidden intentions, whether those things exist or not. The less emotionally obvious you become, the more imagination fills the empty spaces. Seductive personalities, manipulators, and highly charismatic individuals often understand this instinctively. They know predictability lowers emotional intensity, while controlled ambiguity increases it. A person who cannot be easily emotionally defined becomes difficult to forget because the mind keeps trying to solve them long after they are gone. Keep a private inner world nobody fully accesses. One of the most haunting forms of attraction comes from realizing there is a part of someone you may never completely reach. Most people reveal nearly everything about themselves over time. Their routines, fears, thoughts, habits, and emotional patterns slowly become predictable. Once this happens, the mystery disappears, and with it, much of the emotional intensity people once felt around them. A person who keeps a private inner world creates an entirely different psychological effect. No matter how close others become to them, there always seems to be something hidden beneath the surface. Not dishonesty, not emotional coldness, just a quiet sense that there are thoughts, memories, desires, and emotions they choose to protect from complete exposure. This creates an almost addictive curiosity in other people. Human beings are naturally drawn toward mystery because the brain constantly seeks emotional completion. When someone cannot be fully understood, the mind keeps returning to them, searching for deeper meaning. People begin analyzing small details, subtle expressions, changes in tone, and moments of silence, hoping to uncover what remains hidden underneath. What makes this psychologically powerful is that privacy often gets mistaken for depth. Someone who reveals everything immediately feels emotionally available and easy to predict. But someone who maintains a protected inner world appears emotionally complex, self-contained, and difficult to fully possess. That emotional distance quietly increases fascination. There is also a darker side to this dynamic. People often become emotionally attached to what they cannot fully access. The hidden parts of a person begin triggering imagination, projection, and obsession. Others start creating fantasies about who you truly are behind the surface they can see. Many seductive and psychologically influential personalities understand this deeply. Complete emotional exposure rarely creates obsession. Partial access does. Make people work slightly for your approval. One of the most psychologically dangerous things a person can do is avoid giving approval too easily. Most people hand out validation constantly because they want to be liked. They laugh too quickly, praise too freely, reply too eagerly, and emotionally reward people with almost no effort required. Over time, their attention loses emotional value because it becomes predictable and endlessly available. A person who makes others work slightly for their approval creates a completely different psychological effect. Their validation feels selective rather than automatic. When they compliment someone, notice them, or emotionally open up, it feels earned. Human beings naturally value things that require effort, patience, or uncertainty to obtain. Easy approval feels temporary. Selective approval feels emotionally significant. What makes this so psychologically powerful is that people begin unconsciously chasing emotional reward. The brain becomes highly focused on gaining recognition from someone who does not give it freely to everyone. Even small signs of approval suddenly feel more emotionally intense because they are rare enough to matter. A single compliment from a selective person can carry more emotional weight than endless praise from someone constantly seeking attention. The darker side of this technique is that it can quietly create emotional dependency. When approval becomes inconsistent but possible, people often invest more energy trying to obtain it. They begin adjusting their behavior, seeking validation more carefully, and becoming emotionally aware of your reactions. Without realizing it, they slowly place emotional importance on your opinion. Seductive and manipulative personalities understand this principle deeply. They know constant validation creates comfort, but selective validation creates pursuit. The less freely you give emotional approval, the more emotionally valuable your attention can become in the minds of others. Stay emotionally grounded during tension. One of the most intimidating psychological traits a person can possess is emotional stability during stressful situations. Most people lose control when tension enters the room. Their voice changes, their body stiffens, their thoughts become impulsive, and their emotions begin controlling their behavior. Fear, anger, embarrassment, jealousy, or panic quickly take over. This is because tension exposes emotional weak points that many people spend their lives trying to hide. A person who remains emotionally grounded during tension creates an entirely different psychological effect. While others become emotionally chaotic, they stay centered, controlled, and aware of themselves. They may still feel pressure internally, but they refuse to let that pressure dominate their behavior publicly. This calmness immediately changes how people perceive them. Emotional control under pressure is often interpreted as strength, intelligence, confidence, or hidden power. What makes this so psychologically powerful is that calmness becomes contagious. During arguments, stressful conversations, or emotionally charged situations, grounded individuals silently influence the emotional atmosphere around them. Others begin noticing the contrast between their own instability and the calm person's composure. This often creates unconscious respect, fascination, or even discomfort. There is also a darker side to this trait. People who remain emotionally grounded during tension are far harder to manipulate. Emotional manipulators rely heavily on triggering reactions, confusion, insecurity, or impulsive behavior. The moment someone refuses to emotionally collapse under pressure, manipulators lose one of their strongest forms of control. Seductive and psychologically dominant personalities understand this deeply. They know that true influence rarely comes from aggression or emotional explosions. It comes from maintaining inner balance while everyone else is emotionally unraveling. In tense moments, the calmest person in the room often becomes the person everyone unconsciously watches the most. Speak with certainty, not volume. One of the most deceptive signs of insecurity is excessive loudness. Many people believe power comes from speaking over others, raising their voice, or constantly demanding attention. But psychologically, volume often reveals emotional instability rather than strength. Human beings raise their voice when they feel ignored, uncertain, defensive, or desperate to control the room. Noise becomes compensation for inner weakness. A person who speaks with certainty instead of volume creates a completely different effect. Their words feel controlled, deliberate, and emotionally grounded. They do not rush to prove themselves. They do not fight for attention. Instead, they speak as though they already expect people to listen. That quiet certainty creates a strange psychological pressure because calm confidence often feels more powerful than aggression. What makes this so unsettling is that certainty changes how people emotionally interpret your presence. Even simple words begin carrying more weight when delivered with calm conviction. People unconsciously associate steady speech with competence, intelligence, and authority. This is why truly dominant personalities often speak less, slower, and quieter than everyone else in the room. There is also a darker psychological effect beneath this behavior. Human beings instinctively follow emotional certainty, especially during confusion or tension. When someone remains composed while others become emotional or chaotic, people naturally begin looking toward them for stability. The calm speaker slowly gains invisible influence without needing to force it. Manipulators, leaders, interrogators, and seductive personalities understand this principle deeply. They know emotional control is often communicated more through tone than words themselves. A quiet voice with certainty feels dangerous because it suggests hidden confidence, emotional discipline, and the absence of fear. The less someone needs to shout, the more powerful they often appear. Become harder to emotionally manipulate. One of the most dangerous transformations a person can go through is becoming emotionally difficult to control. Most manipulation does not happen through force. It happens quietly through guilt, fear, attention, validation, emotional withdrawal, praise, or pressure. People learn your emotional triggers, then use them to influence your behavior without you even noticing. The moment someone discovers what you desperately need emotionally, they gain silent power over you. This is why emotionally independent people often appear intimidating without trying. They do not crumble when attention disappears. They do not panic when someone becomes distant. They do not immediately sacrifice their boundaries just to avoid rejection or conflict. Because of this, Manipulative individuals quickly realize their usual tactics no longer work. What makes this psychologically powerful is that emotionally grounded people become unpredictable to manipulators. Guilt no longer controls them easily. Praise no longer blinds them. Fear no longer forces immediate reactions. Instead of responding impulsively, they pause, observe, and think carefully before giving emotional access to anyone. That pause alone destroys many manipulation attempts. There is also a darker emotional reality beneath this. Manipulators are often drawn toward emotionally vulnerable people because vulnerability creates access. People who constantly seek approval, fear abandonment, or depend heavily on validation become easier to emotionally steer. But someone who remains calm without external reassurance becomes far more difficult to influence psychologically. This creates an unsettling shift in social dynamics. Once people realize they cannot emotionally control you, many begin treating you differently. Some become more respectful. Others become frustrated because they no longer receive the emotional reactions they depended on. Highly seductive, manipulative, and socially intelligent personalities understand one truth deeply. The less emotionally dependent you become, the more psychological power you quietly reclaim over your own mind. Avoid oversharing your plans too early. One of the most underestimated forms of psychological power is silence about your future intentions. Most people immediately announce their goals, dreams, strategies, and ambitions the moment they feel excited. They speak too early because sharing creates temporary emotional satisfaction. The attention, encouragement, and validation from others make them feel as if progress has already been made, even when nothing has actually happened yet. A person who avoids oversharing their plans creates a completely different psychological effect. Their movements become harder to predict. People cannot fully track their intentions, preparation, or next step. This creates an unsettling sense of mystery because human beings naturally want to understand where others are heading and how much power they are building quietly behind the scenes. What makes this psychologically powerful is that hidden growth often appears more intimidating than visible effort. When someone suddenly evolves without announcing every stage beforehand, it creates emotional shock. Others begin wondering how long the transformation was happening without them noticing. Silence creates the impression of control, discipline, and hidden depth. There is also a darker emotional truth beneath this behavior. The moment you expose your plans too early, people begin influencing them. Some project doubt, some secretly compete, some unconsciously drain your motivation through criticism, jealousy, or excessive opinions. Even supportive reactions can weaken intensity because the brain partially mistakes external validation for completed achievement. Manipulative and highly strategic personalities understand this deeply. They know visible ambition attracts attention, but hidden ambition creates psychological advantage. The less people know about your true direction, the harder it becomes for them to interfere, predict, or emotionally prepare for your growth. Silence keeps your energy protected while curiosity quietly builds around you. Create curiosity instead of chasing validation. One of the fastest ways to lose psychological influence is to constantly seek validation from other people. The moment someone desperately needs approval, attention, reassurance, or acceptance, others immediately sense the emotional dependency beneath their behavior. They begin over-explaining themselves, forcing conversations, seeking compliments, or trying too hard to be liked. Instead of creating attraction, this often creates emotional exhaustion because people can feel when someone is trying to pull validation from them. A person who creates curiosity instead produces the opposite effect. They do not reveal everything immediately. They leave emotional space for imagination to grow naturally. Instead of constantly proving their value, they allow people to slowly discover it. This creates psychological tension because human beings are naturally drawn toward what feels partially hidden, emotionally layered, or difficult to fully understand. What makes curiosity so powerful is that the mind becomes obsessed with unfinished emotional puzzles. When someone gives away too much too quickly, the brain loses interest because there is nothing left to uncover. But when a person reveals themselves gradually, people unconsciously keep thinking about them, trying to understand what exists beneath the surface. Mystery creates emotional investment far more effectively than desperation ever could. There is also a darker psychological side to this principle. Many seductive and manipulative personalities intentionally avoid emotional overexposure because they understand how imagination amplifies attraction. The less people fully know about you, the more they begin filling the gaps with their own fantasies, assumptions, and emotional projections. This is why emotionally intriguing people often appear more magnetic than emotionally available ones. They do not chase validation from the room. Instead, they quietly create an atmosphere where the room begins seeking emotional access to them. Let your absence create emotional contrast. One of the darkest truths about human psychology is that people often realize the emotional value of someone only after that person is no longer constantly present. Familiarity slowly numbs emotional intensity. The more available someone becomes, the more predictable their presence feels. Messages become expected. Attention becomes normal. Emotional excitement fades into routine. This is why constant availability often weakens emotional impact without people realizing it. A person who understands emotional contrast uses absence differently. They do not disappear to play childish games. Instead, they understand that distance changes emotional perception. When your energy, attention, or presence suddenly becomes less accessible, people become more aware of what your presence actually made them feel. Silence creates comparison. The mind begins replaying conversations, memories, and emotional moments that previously felt ordinary. What makes this psychologically powerful is that the brain reacts strongly to emotional interruption. Human beings become emotionally attached not only through pleasure, but through contrast between presence and absence. The sudden removal of someone emotionally significant creates tension inside the mind. People start wondering where you are, what you are feeling, whether they mattered to you, or if they are slowly losing emotional access to you. There is also something deeply seductive about a person whose life clearly continues without constant validation or attention from others. Their absence suggests independence, emotional control, and hidden depth. Instead of chasing reassurance, they allow silence to speak for them. Manipulative and emotionally intelligent personalities understand this effect extremely well. They know overexposure weakens emotional mystery, while controlled distance intensifies emotional focus. Sometimes people do not fully feel your emotional impact while you are present. They feel it most powerfully the moment your presence is no longer easily available to them. Learn how to read emotional energy quietly. One of the creepiest social abilities a person can develop is the ability to sense emotions people are trying to hide. Most communication does not happen through words. Human beings constantly reveal themselves through tiny pauses, facial tension, eye movement, tone changes, breathing patterns, nervous habits, and emotional shifts. They barely notice themselves. While most people only listen to what is being said, emotionally observant individuals pay attention to what leaks through underneath. A person who quietly reads emotional energy begins understanding others in ways that feel almost unnatural. They notice forced smiles that hide resentment. They sense insecurity behind arrogance. They detect attraction hidden beneath indifference. They recognize emotional exhaustion even when someone insists they are fine. This creates a strange psychological advantage because people often reveal their true emotional state without realizing it. What makes this ability so powerful is that human beings desperately want to feel understood while simultaneously trying to hide their vulnerability. The moment someone notices emotions you were attempting to conceal, it creates a deeply unsettling feeling. Part of you feels exposed, another part feels strangely seen. This emotional contradiction often strengthens psychological attachment very quickly. There is also a darker side to emotional observation. The more accurately you understand people's fears, loneliness, insecurities, desires, and emotional wounds, the easier it becomes to influence their behavior. Emotional patterns reveal what comforts them, what controls them, and what they secretly crave from others. Manipulators, interrogators, seductive personalities, and highly persuasive individuals often master this skill silently. They rarely reveal how much they notice. Instead, they gather emotional information patiently while others continue exposing themselves naturally. The frightening truth is that most people believe they are hiding their emotions far better than they actually are. Respond thoughtfully instead of instantly. One of the clearest signs of emotional control is the ability to pause before reacting. Most people respond instantly because they are emotionally driven by pressure, anxiety, excitement, or the fear of silence. The moment they receive a message, criticism, question, or emotional trigger, they rush to answer without thinking deeply. Their reactions become automatic, exposing their emotions, insecurities, and mental state in real time. A person who responds thoughtfully instead of instantly creates a completely different psychological effect. Their pause feels deliberate. It gives the impression that they are emotionally grounded rather than controlled by impulse. Human beings naturally associate measured responses with confidence, intelligence, and self-control, because emotionally reactive people often appear easier to manipulate. What makes this psychologically powerful is that pauses create tension. When someone does not immediately react, the other person begins thinking more intensely. They wonder what is being considered beneath the silence. They replay their own words, question how they were perceived, and become emotionally invested in the response before it even arrives. The delay itself quietly gains psychological power. This becomes especially unsettling during emotional situations, while others rush to defend themselves, over-explain, or emotionally explode. The thoughtful person stays calm enough to process the situation fully before speaking. That restraint creates the feeling that they are mentally ahead of the interaction rather than trapped inside it. There is also a darker side to this technique. Manipulative personalities understand that instant emotional reactions reveal vulnerability, while controlled responses create mystery and emotional imbalance. The less predictable your reactions become, the more carefully people watch you. Over time, your silence starts carrying emotional weight because others never fully know what is happening inside your mind before you choose to speak. Maintain mystery without becoming cold. One of the most psychologically captivating traits a person can possess is mystery balanced with warmth. Most people fail at this balance completely. They either reveal everything about themselves too quickly, destroying intrigue, or they become emotionally distant and cold, making others feel disconnected rather than fascinated. True psychological attraction exists somewhere between emotional openness and emotional restraint. A mysterious person does not expose every thought, emotion, plan, or insecurity immediately. They allow parts of themselves to unfold gradually over time. This creates emotional depth because human beings are naturally drawn toward what they cannot fully predict or completely understand. The unknown stimulates curiosity. It keeps the mind emotionally engaged long after conversations end. However, mystery becomes dangerous when it turns into emotional coldness. If someone feels emotionally unavailable, detached, or impossible to connect with, curiosity slowly transforms into frustration. This is why the most seductive personalities reveal just enough warmth to keep emotional connection alive. They listen carefully, show subtle emotion, maintain calm eye contact, and make people feel emotionally noticed without fully exposing themselves in return. What makes this psychologically powerful is the emotional imbalance it creates. People feel connected enough to want more access, but never enough to feel they completely understand you. This tension keeps the mind emotionally invested. Human beings often become obsessed not with what they fully possess, but with what remains slightly out of reach. There is also a darker side to this dynamic. Manipulative individuals often weaponize mystery to maintain emotional control. By revealing affection, vulnerability, or attention in controlled amounts, they create emotional uncertainty that keeps others psychologically attached. The most unforgettable people are rarely emotionally loud or fully transparent. They are the ones who feel emotionally real, yet impossible to completely figure out. Make people feel chosen, not managed. One of the most emotionally addictive experiences a person can have is the feeling of being genuinely chosen. Most people go through life feeling managed, tolerated, replaced, or emotionally handled rather than deeply valued. They experience relationships where attention feels forced, conversations feel transactional, and affection feels conditional. Because of this, the moment someone makes them feel intentionally chosen, the emotional impact becomes extremely powerful. What makes this psychologically dangerous is that people can immediately sense the difference between authentic emotional attention and calculated control. Manipulative personalities often try to manage people through pressure, excessive texting, guilt, validation games, or emotional dependency. But someone who makes others feel naturally selected creates a completely different emotional atmosphere. Their attention feels calm, deliberate, and meaningful rather than desperate or controlling. This effect becomes even stronger when the attention feels rare. A person who does not constantly seek everyone's approval, but chooses to focus deeply on one individual, creates emotional intensity without needing dramatic behavior. Small acts suddenly carry enormous emotional weight. Remembering details, giving focused attention, or making someone feel emotionally prioritized begins triggering feelings of importance and attachment. There is also a darker psychological side beneath this. Human beings become deeply attached to people who make them feel uniquely seen. The brain interprets chosen attention as emotional value. This is why certain individuals become unforgettable even without overwhelming charm or beauty. They create the feeling that their attention is intentional, not automatic. Seductive personalities, charismatic leaders, and manipulators often understand this principle instinctively. They know people rarely become emotionally attached through force alone. They become attached through significance. The moment someone feels emotionally chosen instead of emotionally managed, they begin lowering defenses without realizing how deeply they are opening themselves psychologically. Stop trying to impress everyone. One of the most psychologically powerful shifts a person can make is losing the need to constantly impress others. Most people spend their lives performing without realizing it. They carefully shape their personality, appearance, achievements, humor, opinions, and even emotions around what will gain approval. Beneath this behavior is a deep fear of being ignored, rejected, or seen as unimportant. The problem is that desperation for validation quietly weakens presence. A person who no longer tries to impress everyone creates a completely different emotional effect. They stop forcing conversations, overselling themselves, or seeking constant recognition. Instead of chasing attention, they become selective with their energy. Ironically, this often makes people far more curious about them. Human beings are naturally drawn toward those who appear emotionally complete without needing outside approval. What makes this unsettling is that emotional independence changes social dynamics immediately. Most people unconsciously expect others to seek acceptance, compete for attention, or prove their worth. When someone refuses to participate in that invisible social performance, they become difficult to emotionally control. Praise affects them less. Criticism affects them less. They begin moving through conversations with a quiet sense of detachment that feels strangely powerful. There is also a darker psychological layer beneath this. People who constantly try to impress others reveal their emotional hunger too clearly. Manipulative individuals quickly notice this need and exploit it through validation, attention, or rejection. But someone who no longer depends on approval becomes harder to influence because their identity no longer rests inside other people's opinions. Highly seductive and socially intelligent personalities understand this deeply. The people who attract the most attention are often the ones who appear least desperate to receive it. Confidence becomes magnetic when it no longer begs to be noticed. Become deeply present during conversations. One of the rarest and most psychologically powerful experiences today is feeling someone's complete attention. Most conversations are shallow performances disguised as connection. People nod while thinking about themselves. They wait for their turn to speak instead of truly listening. Their eyes wander toward notifications, distractions, or the next source of stimulation. Because of this, genuine presence has become emotionally intoxicating. A person who becomes deeply present during conversations creates an almost unsettling emotional effect. When they listen, it feels intense. They notice tone changes, pauses, nervous laughter, hidden emotion, and the meaning beneath words. Their attention feels focused rather than divided. This makes the other person feel unusually important, as though for a brief moment they fully exist in someone else's mind without competition. What makes this psychologically addictive is that human beings are starving for emotional recognition. Most people spend their lives feeling partially ignored. The moment someone gives them complete presence, they unconsciously associate that feeling with safety, attraction, and emotional connection. They leave the interaction feeling strangely energized without always understanding why. There is also a darker psychological side to deep presence. The more carefully you observe someone, the more accurately you begin understanding their fears, insecurities, desires, and emotional patterns. Tiny expressions, hesitations, and shifts in energy reveal information most people overlook completely. Someone who masters deep attention often gains emotional insight others never realize they are exposing. Seductive personalities, interrogators, therapists, and highly persuasive individuals understand this deeply. They know people become emotionally attached to those who make them feel truly heard. In a world filled with distraction and emotional absence, focused attention feels rare enough to become dangerously unforgettable. Use subtle confidence instead of performance. One of the most powerful forms of attraction is confidence that does not need to announce itself. Most people misunderstand confidence completely. They believe confidence means being the loudest person in the room, dominating every conversation, constantly proving intelligence, showing off achievements, or forcing attention toward themselves. In reality, excessive performance often hides insecurity. The harder someone tries to appear powerful, the more emotionally fragile they sometimes become underneath. Subtle confidence creates a completely different psychological effect. It appears calm, controlled, and effortless. A subtly confident person does not rush to impress everyone because they are not emotionally dependent on approval. They speak without desperation, move without nervous urgency, and remain comfortable without constantly seeking validation. This emotional steadiness quietly changes how people perceive them. What makes subtle confidence so psychologically unsettling is that it feels natural rather than forced. Human beings are highly sensitive to emotional authenticity. They can often sense when confidence is performative. Forced charisma may attract temporary attention, but grounded confidence creates deeper emotional impact because it signals inner stability instead of external performance. There is also a darker psychological layer beneath this trait. People unconsciously project power onto individuals who appear emotionally self-contained. The less someone seems desperate for recognition, the more valuable they often appear socially. Others begin wondering what gives them such calm certainty, which creates fascination without the person even trying to demand attention. Highly seductive, charismatic, and psychologically influential personalities understand this deeply. They know true confidence is rarely loud. It exists in restraint, emotional control, calm eye contact, measured speech, and the absence of approval-seeking behavior. The person who appears completely comfortable without needing to prove themselves often becomes the person everyone notices the most. Never beg for emotional reassurance. One of the fastest ways people lose psychological power in relationships is through constant emotional reassurance seeking. Human beings naturally crave certainty, especially when they fear rejection, abandonment, or emotional distance. This fear often pushes people to repeatedly ask questions they already know the answer to. Do you still care about me? Are we okay? Did I do something wrong? Beneath these questions is usually a deeper emotional panic, the fear of not feeling emotionally secure. What makes reassurance seeking dangerous is that it slowly exposes emotional dependency. The more someone constantly needs validation, the more they reveal that their emotional stability depends on another person's reactions. Over time, this creates imbalance. Instead of feeling emotionally grounded, they begin emotionally chasing certainty. Their mood rises and falls based on attention, replies, affection, or approval from others. A person who refuses to beg for emotional reassurance creates a completely different psychological effect. Even when they feel uncertainty, jealousy, or emotional fear internally, they maintain emotional dignity externally. This calm restraint often feels incredibly powerful because it signals self-control and emotional independence. Human beings are naturally drawn toward people who appear emotionally secure within themselves. There is also a darker psychological reality beneath this behavior. People often value emotional access more when it is not desperately demanded from them. The less someone chases reassurance, the more others begin wondering what they are truly feeling beneath the surface. Emotional calmness creates mystery, while desperation destroys it. Manipulative personalities understand this deeply. They know emotionally dependent individuals become easier to control because fear makes people abandon boundaries, self-respect, and clarity. Someone who remains emotionally composed during uncertainty, however, becomes difficult to manipulate. The moment you stop begging for reassurance, you quietly stop handing your emotional power away to other people's temporary behavior. Stay composed when ignored. One of the darkest forms of emotional power is remaining calm when someone tries to make you feel invisible. Being ignored triggers something deeply primal inside human beings. It awakens fear of rejection, abandonment, humiliation, and emotional unworthiness. Most people react immediately when they feel dismissed. They double text, over-explain, seek reassurance, become angry, or desperately try to regain attention. In that moment, their emotional dependence becomes visible. A person who stays composed when ignored creates an entirely different psychological effect. Instead of chasing validation, they remain emotionally controlled. They do not beg for explanations. They do not panic publicly. They do not allow silence to force emotional desperation out of them. This calmness becomes deeply unsettling because most people expect emotional reactions when they withdraw attention. What makes this psychologically powerful is that attention is often used as a form of control. Some individuals intentionally create distance, delays, or silence to test emotional dependence. They want to see how quickly someone loses composure. The moment you react impulsively, they learn exactly how much emotional power they hold over you. But emotional composure interrupts that dynamic completely. When someone cannot provoke anxiety, panic, or desperation from you, the psychological control they expected begins collapsing. Instead of feeling powerful, they often become confused. Your calmness forces them to question their own importance in your emotional world. There is also a deeper emotional truth beneath this. People are often more haunted by those who leave quietly than those who beg to stay. A composed person creates mystery because their silence reveals self-respect rather than emotional collapse. Manipulative and emotionally intelligent personalities understand this deeply. The less visibly affected you become by temporary absence or rejection, the harder it becomes for others to emotionally control your mind. Make your attention feel valuable. One of the most psychologically addictive things a person can possess is valuable attention. Most people give their attention away constantly without realizing how much emotional power it carries. They respond immediately to everyone, seek validation through endless availability, and spread their energy so freely that their presence loses emotional weight. When attention becomes unlimited, it slowly stops feeling special. A person who makes their attention feel valuable creates a completely different psychological effect. Their focus feels selective, intentional, and emotionally meaningful. When they truly listen, notice someone, or invest energy into a conversation, people feel it intensely because it does not happen carelessly with everyone. Human beings naturally value scarce emotional experiences more than common ones. What makes this so psychologically powerful is that attention is deeply tied to emotional validation. The moment someone important focuses on you fully, your brain interprets it as significance. You begin feeling seen, chosen, and emotionally acknowledged. This is why selective attention often creates stronger emotional reactions than compliments or gifts. People become emotionally drawn toward those whose attention feels difficult to fully obtain. There is also a darker side to this dynamic. When your attention becomes emotionally valuable, people start seeking it more consciously. They notice when you withdraw it. They overanalyze small changes in your energy, responses, or level of engagement. Even brief moments of focused attention begin carrying emotional intensity because they feel earned rather than automatic. Seductive, manipulative, and highly influential personalities understand this principle deeply. They know constant attention creates comfort, but selective attention creates emotional pursuit. The less desperate you appear to gain approval or connection, the more emotionally powerful your presence often becomes in the minds of others. Become emotionally self-sufficient. One of the rarest and most psychologically powerful traits a person can develop is emotional self-sufficiency. Most people depend heavily on others for emotional stability without realizing it. Their mood changes based on attention, validation, praise, replies, affection, or approval from the people around them. When they feel ignored, rejected, or emotionally disconnected, their inner world immediately begins collapsing. This creates invisible emotional dependence that quietly controls their behavior. A person who becomes emotionally self-sufficient creates a completely different emotional presence. They still care about people, relationships, and connection, but their emotional survival no longer depends on constant reassurance. They are able to experience loneliness, disappointment, rejection, or emotional distance without losing their sense of identity. This emotional stability feels deeply unusual in a world where many people are psychologically addicted to external validation. What makes emotional self-sufficiency so attractive is that it removes desperation. Desperation is emotionally loud. It appears through clinginess, over-explaining, jealousy, emotional panic, or constant attention-seeking. A self-sufficient person, however, remains emotionally grounded even when connection becomes uncertain. This calmness creates the impression of inner strength and emotional maturity. There is also a darker psychological side to this trait. Emotionally independent people are much harder to manipulate. Manipulators rely on emotional hunger, insecurity, and fear of abandonment to maintain control over others. The moment someone no longer depends emotionally on constant validation, many manipulation tactics lose their power completely. Highly seductive and psychologically influential personalities often understand this principle deeply. They know that emotional control begins with self-control. The less emotionally dependent you become on other people's reactions, the more emotionally magnetic your presence often becomes. People are strangely drawn toward those who seem emotionally complete within themselves. Understand people's hidden insecurities. One of the darkest forms of psychological influence comes from understanding what people secretly feel ashamed of. Almost every human being carries insecurities they rarely reveal openly. Some fear being ignored. Some fear not being attractive enough, intelligent enough, successful enough, or lovable enough. Others hide deep emotional wounds behind confidence, humor, arrogance, or perfectionism. The frightening part is that most people spend their entire lives trying to prevent others from noticing these hidden weaknesses. A person who learns to recognize hidden insecurities gains enormous emotional influence. Tiny behaviors often reveal what someone desperately tries to hide. Excessive joking may conceal loneliness. Constant bragging may hide feelings of inadequacy. Over-explaining may reveal fear of rejection. Aggression may cover emotional fragility. Human beings unconsciously expose their deepest insecurities through patterns in speech, body language, emotional reactions, and attention-seeking behavior. What makes this psychologically powerful is that people become emotionally vulnerable around those who accurately see beneath the surface. The moment you quietly understand someone's hidden fear without them directly admitting it, you begin seeing parts of them most people never notice. This creates emotional exposure. They may feel strangely understood, but also subtly uncomfortable because their emotional mask no longer feels completely safe. There is also a dangerous side to this knowledge. Manipulators, interrogators, seductive personalities, and emotionally controlling individuals often study insecurities carefully because insecurities influence behavior more than logic does. A person's hidden fears can predict their decisions, emotional triggers, desires, and weaknesses. Someone afraid of abandonment behaves differently from someone afraid of humiliation or invisibility. This is why emotional observation becomes so powerful. Most people believe they are hiding their insecurities successfully, but human behavior constantly leaks emotional truth. The person who notices these hidden emotional fractures quietly gains access to the deepest parts of someone's psychology without needing force or confrontation. Mirror energy, carefully and subtly. One of the most psychologically seductive abilities a person can develop is the power of subtle mirroring. Human beings are naturally drawn toward people who feel emotionally familiar. When someone reflects our energy, tone, humor, body language, or emotional state in a natural way, the brain subconsciously interprets it as connection, similarity, and trust. Most people never consciously notice this happening, which is why the effect can feel strangely powerful. A person who mirrors energy carefully creates the unsettling feeling that they just understand you. If someone speaks softly, they soften their tone slightly as well. If someone becomes excited, they match that emotional intensity naturally. If someone is emotionally reserved, they avoid overwhelming them with excessive energy. This creates emotional synchronization, where interactions begin feeling smooth, effortless, and strangely intimate. What makes this technique so effective is that people are emotionally comforted by reflections of themselves. The brain relaxes around familiarity. When someone subtly mirrors your emotional rhythm, you unconsciously lower your defenses because they begin feeling psychologically safe. This is why people often feel unusually connected to someone they barely know. There is also a darker side to mirroring. Manipulators, con artists, interrogators, and seductive personalities frequently use it to accelerate trust artificially. They study emotional behavior carefully, then reflect it back with precision. They mirror interests, opinions, speech patterns, and vulnerabilities to create the illusion of deep compatibility. The victim often believes they have finally found someone who truly gets them, when in reality, they are being psychologically studied. The frightening part is that effective mirroring rarely feels fake when done correctly. It feels natural. That is why emotionally intelligent people pay close attention to those who seem to adapt their personality too perfectly, depending on who they are around. Make people feel emotionally safe around you. One of the most powerful forms of influence is making people feel emotionally safe in your presence. Most human beings spend their lives hiding parts of themselves. They hide insecurities, fears, embarrassing thoughts, painful memories, and emotional wounds because they are terrified of judgment, rejection, or betrayal. Even in close relationships, many people never fully relax emotionally because they fear their vulnerability will eventually be used against them. A person who creates emotional safety produces a deeply addictive psychological effect. Around them, people slowly lower emotional defenses they normally keep guarded. They begin speaking more honestly, revealing thoughts they rarely share, and exposing emotions they usually suppress. This happens because emotional safety makes the nervous system relax. The mind stops preparing for emotional attack and starts craving connection instead. What makes this so psychologically intense is that emotional safety is extremely rare. Many people are listened to, but not understood. Others are tolerated, but not accepted. When someone responds without immediate judgment, mockery, emotional punishment, or manipulation, it creates a feeling of relief that can become deeply emotionally binding. There is also a darker side to this dynamic. The more emotionally safe people feel around you, the more access you gain to their inner world. They reveal insecurities, weaknesses, desires, regrets, and emotional patterns without realizing how exposed they are becoming. Someone who understands emotional safety gains extraordinary psychological insight into others. Therapists, seductive personalities, manipulators, and highly influential individuals understand this deeply. They know people become emotionally attached to those who make them feel accepted without fear. In a world where many interactions feel performative and emotionally dangerous, genuine emotional safety feels almost hypnotic, making people crave your presence without fully understanding why. Develop a calm, grounded voice. One of the most psychologically influential traits a person can possess is a calm, grounded voice. Human beings react emotionally to tone long before they fully process words. A shaky voice reveals nervousness. A rushed voice reveals anxiety. An overly loud voice often hides insecurity or emotional instability. This is why the sound of someone's voice can instantly change how powerful, trustworthy, or emotionally attractive they appear. A calm, grounded voice creates a completely different emotional effect. It feels stable, controlled, and emotionally safe. Even in stressful situations, the person speaks with steady pacing and emotional balance, rather than panic or impulsiveness. This naturally draws attention, because calmness contrasts sharply against the emotional noise most people constantly carry inside themselves. What makes this psychologically powerful is that the human nervous system unconsciously responds to emotional steadiness. People often mirror the emotional energy they are exposed to. When someone speaks calmly during tension, arguments, or uncertainty, others slowly begin adjusting their emotional state around that energy. A grounded voice can quietly lower defenses, reduce anxiety, and create emotional trust without needing dramatic words. There is also a darker side to this effect. Manipulative, charismatic, and psychologically dominant personalities often master vocal control because they understand how strongly tone influences perception. A calm voice during emotionally intense moments can create the illusion of authority, intelligence, and emotional superiority. Even when others disagree, they may still feel psychologically affected by the speaker's composure. The unsettling truth is that people remember emotional energy more than information. Long after words are forgotten, the nervous system remembers how someone made them feel. A calm, grounded voice leaves an emotional imprint because it communicates control in a world filled with emotional chaos and psychological noise. Avoid reacting to every provocation. One of the clearest signs of emotional weakness is the inability to resist reacting. Human beings are constantly being emotionally tested, often in subtle ways. Some people provoke intentionally through disrespect, criticism, jealousy, mockery, or passive aggression. Others do it unconsciously because they are emotionally chaotic themselves. Either way, most people immediately react. They defend themselves, argue, explode emotionally, over-explain, or desperately try to prove something. The moment this happens, emotional control quietly shifts away from them. A person who refuses to react to every provocation creates a completely different psychological effect. Their emotional restraint becomes unsettling because most people expect emotional access to others. They expect to trigger anger, insecurity, frustration, or defensiveness. When those reactions never fully arrive, the person provoking often becomes emotionally confused instead. What makes this so psychologically powerful is that reactions provide emotional satisfaction. People who provoke others are often searching for proof that they affected you. Your anger confirms their power. Your defensiveness confirms emotional vulnerability. Your emotional collapse gives them psychological control. Calmness, however, interrupts that reward completely. Silence and restraint force the other person to sit alone with their own emotional energy. There is also a darker layer beneath this behavior. Highly emotionally disciplined people understand that not every situation deserves emotional investment. Some provocations are traps designed to pull you into emotional chaos where clear thinking disappears. The more reactive someone becomes, the easier they are to manipulate because emotions begin controlling their decisions. Manipulators, dominant personalities, and emotionally intelligent individuals know this instinctively. They understand that emotional control is often won by the person who remains composed the longest. The less predictable your reactions become, the harder people find it to emotionally control, destabilize, or psychologically read you. Learn when silence creates attraction. One of the most unsettling psychological forces in human interaction is silence. Most people are terrified of it. The moment a conversation becomes quiet, they rush to fill the emptiness with nervous words. unnecessary explanations, forced jokes, or emotional oversharing. Silence exposes insecurity because it removes the comfort of constant reassurance. This is why someone who remains calm inside silence immediately feels different. A person who understands how to use silence creates emotional tension without saying very much. Instead of constantly speaking to maintain attention, they allow pauses to exist naturally. They do not rush to explain every thought or emotion. This forces other people to lean in psychologically. Human beings are naturally uncomfortable with uncertainty, and silence creates uncertainty better than almost anything else. What makes silence so psychologically seductive is that the human mind automatically begins filling empty space with imagination. The less information people receive, the more their thoughts begin searching for meaning. They start wondering what you are thinking, what you feel, or why you remain emotionally composed. Curiosity quietly grows because silence leaves emotional questions unanswered. There is also a darker layer beneath this dynamic. Silence often creates stronger emotional impact than excessive communication. A delayed response, a calm pause during eye contact, or the refusal to emotionally react immediately can create more tension than endless conversation. It shifts emotional control because the silent person appears grounded while others become restless, trying to interpret them. Manipulators, interrogators, seductive personalities, and socially dominant individuals understand this deeply. They know people often reveal more when trying to escape silence. Nervousness pushes individuals to keep talking, exposing insecurities, emotions, and hidden thoughts naturally. The frightening truth is that silence is rarely empty. In many situations, silence becomes the loudest psychological presence in the room. Reveal vulnerability selectively. One of the most psychologically seductive things a person can do is reveal vulnerability with control instead of desperation. Most people either hide everything behind emotional walls or expose too much too quickly in search of connection. When vulnerability becomes uncontrolled, it often overwhelms others and weakens emotional mystery. But when vulnerability is revealed carefully and selectively, it creates a completely different emotional effect. A person who reveals vulnerability selectively appears emotionally deep rather than emotionally unstable. They do not constantly seek sympathy or attention, yet small moments of honesty suddenly expose hidden layers beneath their calm exterior. A brief confession, a painful memory, or a rare emotional truth feels far more powerful when it emerges unexpectedly from someone usually composed. What makes this psychologically intense is that selective vulnerability creates emotional contrast. Human beings become deeply curious when they realize there is softness beneath restraint or pain beneath confidence. The brain starts focusing more carefully on the person because vulnerability makes them feel real, while restraint keeps them difficult to fully understand. This combination often creates emotional fascination. There is also a darker psychological side to this technique. Revealing vulnerability strategically can lower people's emotional defenses. The moment someone sees emotional honesty, they often begin trusting more quickly and exposing deeper parts of themselves in return. They subconsciously believe they are experiencing genuine intimacy, even if the vulnerability was carefully controlled from the beginning. Seductive personalities, manipulators, and emotionally intelligent individuals understand this deeply. They know complete emotional distance feels cold, but carefully revealed vulnerability creates attachment. The less frequently emotional openness appears, the more emotionally significant it becomes. Over time, people stop chasing perfection and start becoming emotionally addicted to the feeling that they are slowly accessing parts of you few others ever see. Build a life people want to enter. One of the most magnetic forms of attraction has nothing to do with appearance, charm, or manipulation. It comes from building a life that already feels meaningful without needing other people to complete it. Most individuals secretly search for someone to rescue them from boredom, emptiness, loneliness, or lack of direction. This emotional hunger makes them chase attention, relationships, and validation because they have not created a life they genuinely enjoy living alone. A person who builds a fulfilling life creates a completely different psychological effect. They have passions, routines, goals, discipline, purpose, and emotional direction outside of social approval. Their happiness does not fully depend on who texts them back, who notices them, or who chooses them. This independence becomes deeply attractive because it signals emotional stability rather than emotional neediness. What makes this psychologically powerful is that human beings are naturally drawn toward energy that feels alive. When someone has their own world, their own focus, and their own sense of meaning, people begin wanting access to that energy. Instead of feeling responsible for entertaining or emotionally carrying the person, they feel curious about becoming part of their life. There is also a darker psychological layer beneath this. People often value what appears emotionally scarce and difficult to fully possess. Someone with a rich inner life seems less controllable because they are not emotionally starving for attention. This creates intrigue. Others begin fearing they could be replaced or left behind if they do not maintain emotional connection. Highly seductive and psychologically influential personalities understand this deeply. They know attraction grows stronger when your life already feels complete without external validation. Instead of chasing people to fill emptiness, they create an atmosphere where people quietly begin chasing emotional access to them. Keep your standards visible through actions. One of the most psychologically powerful things a person can possess is silent standards. Most people constantly announce their boundaries, values, and expectations through words, but their behavior quietly contradicts everything they say. They tolerate disrespect after claiming they deserve better. They chase people who ignore them. They abandon their principles the moment attention, attraction, or fear becomes involved. Over time, people stop respecting spoken standards that are never enforced through action. A person who keeps their standards visible through behavior creates a completely different emotional effect. They do not constantly threaten, explain, or seek validation for their boundaries. Instead, their actions communicate everything. If they feel disrespected, they emotionally withdraw without dramatic scenes. If someone repeatedly crosses boundaries, access becomes limited naturally. Their behavior remains calm but consistent. This consistency makes people take them seriously because human beings trust actions far more than words. What makes this psychologically intense is that visible standards create emotional consequences without needing aggression. People quickly realize that certain behaviors lead to distance, reduced attention, or lost emotional access. This creates a subtle form of pressure because others begin adjusting their behavior to avoid losing connection with someone they value. There is also a darker side beneath this principle. Human beings are naturally drawn toward people who appear difficult to emotionally compromise. Someone with visible standards signals self-respect, emotional discipline, and internal stability. This often increases attraction because emotionally grounded individuals feel harder to manipulate, control, or emotionally consume completely. Seductive personalities, respected leaders, and emotionally intelligent individuals understand this deeply. They know standards lose all psychological power when they exist only as words. Real standards are revealed through patterns of behavior. The moment people realize your actions consistently match your boundaries, they begin treating you differently because they understand your emotional value is not easily negotiated away. Never chase people who enjoy distance games. One of the most emotionally dangerous traps in human relationships is chasing people who intentionally create distance to feel powerful. Some individuals use emotional inconsistency as a form of control. One moment they give attention, warmth, and closeness. The next moment they disappear, become cold, delay responses, or act emotionally unavailable. This creates confusion, and confusion is psychologically addictive because the brain becomes obsessed with restoring emotional certainty. Most people react to this distance emotionally. They overthink every interaction, replay conversations, seek reassurance, and work harder to regain the attention they suddenly lost. Without realizing it, they begin emotionally chasing someone who enjoys being pursued more than being emotionally present. The relationship slowly transforms into a psychological power game instead of genuine connection. A person who refuses to chase changes this dynamic completely. Instead of panicking when distance appears, they remain emotionally grounded. They recognize that healthy relationships do not require constant emotional guessing or manipulation. Their calmness becomes unsettling because people who rely on distance games expect emotional desperation in return. What makes this psychologically powerful is that emotional pursuit often feeds manipulative behavior. The more someone realizes you will chase them, no matter how inconsistent they become, the more control they quietly gain over your emotions. Attention becomes a reward they give and remove whenever they want. Over time, this creates emotional dependency disguised as attraction. There is also a darker truth beneath this. Some people are not emotionally confused at all. They fully understand what they are doing. They create uncertainty because uncertainty keeps people emotionally attached. Intermittent attention can become more addictive than constant affection because the brain keeps chasing the emotional reward of closeness returning. Emotionally intelligent people understand one painful reality deeply. Real connection rarely requires psychological games to survive. Become harder to emotionally predict. One of the most psychologically unsettling traits a person can develop is emotional unpredictability wrapped in calmness. Most people become easy to emotionally read over time. Their reactions, desires, insecurities, and emotional patterns become visible through repetition. Others learn exactly what makes them angry, excited, jealous, desperate, or vulnerable. Once someone becomes emotionally predictable, they also become easier to manipulate. A person who becomes harder to emotionally predict creates a completely different psychological effect. Their reactions are controlled enough that people cannot fully anticipate what they are thinking or feeling. Sometimes they remain calm when emotion is expected. Other times they become distant without explanation. Their emotional rhythm cannot be completely mapped, and this uncertainty keeps people mentally engaged. What makes this psychologically powerful is that the human brain obsesses over incomplete emotional certainty. When people cannot fully predict someone's reactions, they unconsciously pay more attention to them. They begin analyzing small details, searching for clues, replaying conversations, and monitoring emotional changes more carefully than usual. Curiosity quietly transforms into emotional fixation because uncertainty keeps the mind emotionally active. There is also a darker side to this dynamic. Emotional unpredictability can create subtle emotional imbalance in others. The less sure people feel about where they stand with you emotionally, the more they often seek reassurance, validation, or clarity. Without realizing it, they begin emotionally adapting themselves around your behavior while trying to regain certainty. Seductive personalities, manipulators, and highly influential individuals understand this principle deeply. They know complete emotional consistency creates comfort, but emotional unpredictability creates fascination. The harder you become to fully decode emotionally, the more psychological space you begin occupying inside other people's minds. Let confidence replace constant communication. One of the clearest signs of emotional insecurity is the inability to tolerate silence. Most people constantly communicate because they are afraid of losing connection, attention, or emotional control. They overtext, overexplain, repeatedly seek reassurance, and panic when responses become slower or emotional energy shifts. Beneath this behavior is usually fear of being forgotten, replaced, misunderstood, or emotionally abandoned. A confident person operates differently. They understand that genuine connection does not require endless communication to survive. Instead of constantly chasing interaction, they allow space to exist naturally without emotionally collapsing inside it. This creates a completely different psychological presence, because emotional calmness feels rare in a world addicted to instant validation. What makes this psychologically powerful is that silence creates emotional tension. When someone is not constantly available, constantly reacting, or constantly seeking reassurance, people begin thinking about them more. Human beings often become emotionally attached, not through endless access, but through anticipation and uncertainty. The less desperate someone appears for connection, the more emotionally valuable they often seem. There is also a darker side to this principle. Manipulative and seductive personalities understand that constant communication can reduce emotional intensity over time. By controlling availability and emotional exposure, they create psychological space for curiosity, longing, and emotional projection to grow stronger. Absence begins amplifying emotional presence inside the other person's mind. However, true confidence is not emotional games or intentional neglect. It is the ability to remain emotionally secure even when communication becomes quiet. A confident person does not panic during silence because their sense of self is not dependent on constant emotional reassurance. The unsettling truth is that people often trust calm distance more than desperate attention. Someone who remains emotionally steady without constantly chasing connection quietly appears more powerful, grounded, and difficult to emotionally control. Create emotional tension through restraint. One of the most psychologically seductive forces in human interaction is restraint. Most people believe attraction and emotional intensity come from excess, too many words, too much attention, too much emotional exposure. They reveal everything immediately, speak impulsively, and constantly seek reassurance through endless communication. But overexposure often kills emotional tension because nothing is left for the mind to wonder about. A person who understands restraint creates a completely different emotional effect. Instead of revealing every thought, feeling, or desire instantly, they hold certain things back deliberately. They pause before responding. They maintain emotional composure during intense moments. They allow silence, distance, and anticipation to exist naturally. This restraint creates psychological tension because human beings become deeply focused on what feels emotionally incomplete. What makes this so powerful is that the brain becomes obsessed with uncertainty and anticipation. When someone gives just enough emotional energy to create connection, but not enough to remove all mystery, the mind starts filling the gaps on its own. People replay conversations repeatedly, analyze tiny details, and search for hidden meaning beneath restrained behavior. Emotional tension grows strongest when curiosity remains unresolved. There is also something deeply intimidating about a person who does not emotionally overflow. Most people expose themselves too quickly because they fear losing attention. Someone who remains emotionally controlled appears confident, disciplined, and difficult to fully access. This creates the impression of hidden emotional depth beneath the surface. Seductive personalities, interrogators, charismatic leaders, and manipulators often understand this principle instinctively. They know emotional restraint magnifies presence because the human imagination becomes more powerful than direct exposure. The less emotionally available every thought and feeling becomes, the more psychologically consuming the person often appears to others. Speak less about yourself than others expect. One of the most psychologically intriguing things a person can do is resist the urge to constantly talk about themselves. Most people reveal far more than they realize. They explain their opinions, tell long stories, overshare emotions, defend their choices, and fill conversations with personal details because they want to feel seen, understood, or important. In doing so, they unconsciously expose their insecurities, emotional needs, and inner patterns to everyone around them. A person who speaks less about themselves creates a completely different emotional effect. Instead of constantly offering information, they observe more than they reveal. They answer without over-explaining. They allow pauses to exist naturally. This creates psychological imbalance because human beings instinctively expect emotional access through conversation. When that access remains limited, curiosity quietly begins growing. What makes this so powerful is that silence forces people to focus more intensely on you. The less information they receive, the more their imagination begins filling the gaps. They start analyzing your reactions, tone, expressions, and brief comments for hidden meaning. Instead of fully understanding you, they continue wondering about you long after the interaction ends. There is also a darker side to excessive self-disclosure. The more openly people expose themselves, the easier they become to emotionally predict and manipulate. Every unnecessary detail reveals fears, desires, weaknesses, insecurities, and emotional patterns. Manipulative personalities quietly collect this information while revealing very little about themselves in return. Someone who speaks less about themselves often appears emotionally disciplined, self-contained, and psychologically difficult to read. This creates an unsettling sense of depth because people cannot easily place you into a simple category. Highly seductive and socially intelligent individuals understand this deeply. Mystery is rarely created through dramatic behavior. It is often created through restraint, selective disclosure, and knowing when silence is more powerful than explanation. Notice tiny emotional shifts in people. One of the creepiest forms of psychological awareness is the ability to detect emotional changes most people completely miss. Human beings constantly leak emotions through subtle behaviors without realizing it. A slight pause before answering, a forced smile, a change in breathing, restless fingers, eye movements, tension in the jaw, or a sudden shift in tone can quietly reveal fear, attraction, discomfort, jealousy, sadness, or insecurity long before words ever do. Most people are too distracted to notice these signals. They hear words, but they do not truly observe emotional behavior. A person who notices tiny emotional shifts creates a deeply unsettling advantage because they begin understanding what others feel before those emotions are openly expressed. This makes conversations feel strangely intense, as though they can see beneath the surface of people's masks. What makes this psychologically powerful is that human beings desperately want to feel understood, yet they also fear being emotionally exposed. The moment someone notices emotional changes others overlook, people begin feeling both seen and vulnerable at the same time. A simple observation about someone's mood or hidden discomfort can instantly weaken emotional defenses because it touches something they thought was invisible. There is also a darker psychological side to this skill. Tiny emotional shifts often reveal hidden insecurities, emotional wounds, attraction, dishonesty, or internal conflict. Someone who becomes highly observant can quietly guide conversations, influence emotional states, or uncover weaknesses without directly asking questions. Manipulators, interrogators, therapists, and seductive personalities understand this deeply. They know people reveal their inner world through small, unconscious behaviors constantly. The person who notices those emotional cracks gains access to information others never even realize they exposed. Give compliments, rarely but sincerely. One of the most psychologically powerful social behaviors is the ability to give meaningful compliments without overusing them. Most people compliment constantly without realizing how emotionally empty their words have become. They praise too quickly, too often, and too generically in order to gain approval, create likability, or keep conversations comfortable. Over time, excessive compliments lose emotional weight because they begin sounding automatic rather than genuine. A person who gives compliments rarely creates a completely different emotional effect. Their words feel deliberate instead of performative. Because they do not constantly hand out validation, people unconsciously assign greater value to the moments when they finally do express admiration. The compliment feels earned rather than casually distributed, which makes it emotionally memorable. What makes this psychologically intense is sincerity. Human beings are emotionally starved for genuine recognition, not empty praise. When someone notices a hidden strength, a quiet insecurity, or a deeply personal trait others overlook, the emotional impact becomes far stronger than surface-level compliments about appearance or status. People remember being emotionally understood far longer than they remember being casually praised. There is also a darker psychological side to this principle. Rare compliments create emotional unpredictability, which increases psychological attention. The brain becomes more sensitive to approval when it is not constantly available. This is why manipulative and seductive personalities often use selective validation carefully. They understand that intermittent emotional reward creates stronger emotional attachment than endless reassurance. The unsettling truth is that constant praise can feel emotionally cheap, while selective sincerity feels emotionally significant. A well-timed, deeply genuine compliment can stay inside someone's mind for years because it touches the part of them that secretly wonders whether anyone truly notices who they are beneath the surface. Become unforgettable through emotional presence. One of the rarest things a human being can experience is feeling fully present with another person. Most conversations today are emotionally empty. People listen while thinking about themselves. They glance at phones, search for opportunities to speak, or drift mentally while pretending to pay attention. Even in crowded rooms and close relationships, many people secretly feel emotionally invisible. This is why emotional presence becomes so psychologically powerful. A person with strong emotional presence makes others feel intensely noticed. When they listen, their attention feels complete. Their eye contact feels focused without becoming uncomfortable. Their responses feel emotionally connected rather than automatic. Instead of rushing to impress, interrupt, or dominate the interaction, they make the other person feel deeply felt and psychologically important. This creates a level of emotional impact most people rarely experience. What makes this effect so dangerous is that human beings become emotionally attached to people who make them feel emotionally alive. The brain remembers how someone made you feel far longer than the exact words they said. A person with emotional presence creates moments that feel unusually vivid, intimate, and psychologically charged because their attention carries emotional weight. There is also a darker layer beneath this ability. Emotionally intelligent individuals understand that focused attention itself is a form of influence. The more emotionally seen someone feels around you, the more their defenses quietly lower. They begin revealing thoughts, insecurities, desires, and emotional wounds they normally hide from others. Presence creates trust faster than performance ever could. Seductive personalities, therapists, leaders, and manipulators often understand this instinctively. They know most people are starving for genuine emotional attention. In a world full of distraction and emotional detachment, the person who makes others feel deeply present becomes almost impossible to forget because emotional presence feels rare, intimate, and psychologically consuming. Keep parts of your personality unexplained. One of the most psychologically captivating things about a person is the feeling that there are hidden layers beneath what everyone can see. Most people constantly explain themselves because they fear misunderstanding. They clarify every behavior, justify every emotion, and reveal every motive in an attempt to make others comfortable with them. But the more predictable a person becomes, the less emotionally intriguing they often feel. A person who keeps parts of their personality unexplained creates a completely different psychological effect. Certain behaviors, thoughts, or emotional reactions remain undefined. They may suddenly become quiet without explanation, reveal unexpected depth in small moments, or display contradictions people cannot fully understand. This creates emotional tension because the human mind naturally craves certainty and clear patterns. What makes this so powerful is that unexplained behavior forces people to think about you long after interactions end. The brain becomes obsessed with unfinished understanding. People replay conversations, analyze details, and search for hidden meaning in things you never fully explained. Curiosity grows because uncertainty keeps emotional attention alive. There is also a darker psychological layer beneath this. Once people believe they fully understand someone, they often stop emotionally studying them. Familiarity reduces fascination, but someone who remains partially unreadable continues triggering emotional interest because there always seems to be something deeper hidden underneath the surface. Manipulative and seductive personalities understand this principle extremely well. They know complete emotional transparency removes mystery. By revealing certain parts of themselves while quietly protecting others, they create the illusion of endless depth. People become emotionally attached not only to who they are, but to the hidden parts they still hope to uncover one day. The unsettling truth is that human beings are often more fascinated by what they cannot fully explain than by what they completely understand. Stay detached from needing approval. One of the most psychologically powerful things a person can develop is freedom from constant approval seeking. Most human beings are emotionally controlled by the opinions of others more than they realize. Their confidence rises or collapses depending on validation, praise, attention, or acceptance. They adjust their personality to avoid rejection, soften their opinions to stay liked, and constantly monitor how they are being perceived. This invisible dependence quietly controls their behavior. A person who becomes detached from needing approval creates a completely different emotional effect. They appear grounded, difficult to manipulate, and emotionally independent. Because they are not desperate to be accepted, their actions feel more authentic and unpredictable. Human beings are naturally drawn toward people who seem emotionally self-sufficient because confidence without desperation feels rare and powerful. What makes this psychologically unsettling is that approval-seeking behavior is extremely common. Most people unconsciously expect others to chase validation, over-explain themselves, or seek reassurance. When someone remains calm without needing constant acceptance, it creates curiosity and even intimidation. Others begin wondering what gives that person such emotional stability. There is also a darker psychological side to this. The less emotionally dependent you become on approval, the harder it becomes for people to control you through praise, criticism, guilt, or social pressure. Manipulation loses effectiveness because your emotional state no longer depends entirely on external reactions. This creates the impression of hidden inner strength. Seductive personalities, leaders, manipulators, and highly influential individuals understand this deeply. They know desperation weakens psychological presence, while emotional detachment increases it. The less you seek approval from others, the more your attention, validation, and emotional energy begin feeling valuable in return. People often become strangely drawn to those who do not seem emotionally desperate to be chosen. Let people wonder what you are thinking sometimes. One of the most psychologically unsettling things a person can do is avoid revealing every thought and emotion immediately. Most people constantly expose their internal world without realizing it. Their face, words, reactions, and impulses reveal exactly what they feel in real time. Because of this, they become emotionally predictable. Others quickly learn how to read them, influence them, and anticipate their behavior. A person who occasionally keeps their thoughts hidden creates a completely different emotional effect. They leave small gaps in emotional certainty. Instead of constantly explaining themselves, they allow silence, subtle expressions, and emotional restraint to exist naturally. This creates curiosity because human beings instinctively try to understand what remains partially unknown. What makes this psychologically powerful is that uncertainty activates attention. The moment people cannot fully read you, their mind begins working harder to figure you out. They replay conversations, study your reactions, and search for hidden meaning beneath your calmness. In many cases, the mystery they imagine becomes stronger than anything you could have openly explained. There is also a darker psychological layer beneath this behavior. Emotionally unpredictable people are often harder to manipulate because others cannot easily identify their weaknesses, intentions, or emotional triggers. Manipulators rely heavily on emotional transparency to control reactions. The less emotionally exposed someone appears, the more difficult they become to emotionally influence. Highly seductive and psychologically dominant personalities understand this deeply. They know constant emotional exposure weakens intrigue, while controlled emotional ambiguity strengthens it. However, the power does not come from acting cold or detached. It comes from revealing yourself gradually instead of instantly. The human mind becomes obsessed with unfinished emotional puzzles. Sometimes, the less people fully understand your thoughts, the more intensely they continue thinking about you long after you leave the room. Avoid emotional desperation at all costs. One of the fastest ways people lose emotional power is through desperation. Human beings are extremely sensitive to emotional neediness, even when it is not spoken directly. Desperation leaks through behavior. It appears in excessive texting, constant reassurance seeking, over-explaining, emotional chasing, forced attention, and the inability to tolerate distance or uncertainty. The frightening part is that desperation often pushes people away, while making the desperate person cling even harder. A person who avoids emotional desperation creates a completely different psychological effect. Even when they feel attraction, loneliness, fear, or emotional attachment internally, they maintain emotional balance externally. They do not beg for attention. They do not collapse emotionally the moment someone becomes distant. Instead, they remain grounded within themselves. This calm emotional control often feels incredibly attractive because it signals self-respect and inner stability. What makes desperation so psychologically dangerous is that it silently transfers emotional power to other people. The more someone appears emotionally dependent on attention, affection, or validation, the easier they become to manipulate. Fear begins controlling their decisions. They tolerate disrespect they normally would not accept simply because they are terrified of losing emotional connection. There is also a darker reason emotionally composed people feel more magnetic. Human beings naturally value what appears emotionally secure and difficult to possess completely. Someone who remains emotionally stable without constantly needing reassurance creates mystery and emotional tension. Their calmness suggests they have a life, identity, and emotional center that does not collapse around other people's behavior. Manipulators, seductive personalities, and emotionally intelligent individuals understand this deeply. They know desperation weakens emotional influence because it exposes fear openly. The less someone appears emotionally controlled by attachment, rejection, or uncertainty, the more psychologically powerful and emotionally unforgettable they often become. Become excellent at listening deeply. One of the rarest and most psychologically powerful abilities a person can develop is the ability to truly listen. Most people do not actually listen during conversations. They wait for their turn to speak, think about what they will say next, or search for ways to redirect attention back toward themselves. Because of this, many people spend their entire lives feeling emotionally unheard, even while surrounded by others. A person who listens deeply creates an emotional experience that feels almost unsettling. They notice tone changes, pauses, hidden emotions, contradictions, and the meaning beneath the words. They remember details other people ignore. They make someone feel fully seen instead of partially acknowledged. This kind of attention becomes emotionally addictive because genuine listening is so rare. What makes deep listening psychologically powerful is that people naturally reveal more around someone who feels emotionally safe. The more understood they feel, the more their emotional defenses begin lowering without realizing it. They start sharing fears, insecurities, desires, disappointments, and hidden thoughts they normally keep buried. In many cases, they expose their true emotional world simply because someone finally made them feel heard. There is also a darker side to this ability. Deep listening gives enormous psychological insight into other people. The more someone speaks freely, the more they reveal what controls them emotionally. Their wounds, loneliness, ambitions, resentments, and emotional needs slowly become visible. Manipulative individuals often use listening not out of empathy, but to gather emotional information they can later use for influence or control. Highly seductive and socially intelligent personalities understand this deeply. People become attached to those who make them feel emotionally important. In a world where everyone wants to be noticed, the person who listens carefully often gains the strongest emotional influence without needing to dominate the conversation at all. Develop quiet charisma instead of loud confidence. One of the most unsettling forms of attraction is quiet charisma. Most people associate confidence with loudness, dominance, constant talking, or visible attempts to command attention. They believe power must always announce itself. Because of this, many individuals perform confidence aggressively, trying to prove their importance through volume, attention-seeking behavior, or exaggerated energy. But truly, magnetic people often operate very differently. A person with quiet charisma creates psychological impact without forcing it. They do not constantly compete for attention, yet people notice them anyway. Their calmness feels deliberate. Their words are measured. Their presence carries emotional weight without visible effort. Instead of demanding validation from the room, they seem emotionally comfortable whether attention arrives or not. And this emotional independence becomes strangely captivating. What makes quiet charisma so psychologically powerful is that human beings are naturally curious about restrained energy. Loud personalities reveal themselves immediately, leaving little for the imagination to explore. Quietly charismatic people, however, create mystery. Others begin watching them more carefully, trying to understand what makes them feel so grounded and difficult to ignore despite saying less. There is also a darker side to this kind of presence. Quiet charisma often gives the illusion of hidden depth, intelligence, or emotional control. Because the person reveals less outwardly, people project meaning onto them automatically. Silence becomes interpreted as confidence. Restraint becomes mistaken for power. Emotional control starts feeling intimidating without a single aggressive action being taken. Seductive personalities, influential leaders, and highly persuasive individuals understand this deeply. They know loud confidence demands attention temporarily, but quiet charisma lingers in people's minds long after the interaction ends. The less someone appears desperate to be noticed, the more emotionally noticeable they often become. Protect your emotional energy carefully. One of the most overlooked forms of psychological power is the ability to protect your emotional energy. Most people allow others constant access to their emotions without realizing the damage it creates. They absorb negativity, drama, criticism, manipulation, and emotional chaos from everyone around them. Over time, this leaves them mentally exhausted, emotionally reactive, and psychologically drained without fully understanding why. A person who protects their emotional energy creates a completely different presence. They become selective about who gains access to their time, emotions, attention, and vulnerability. They do not feel obligated to emotionally entertain every person, fix every problem, or respond to every emotional provocation. This emotional discipline immediately changes how others perceive them because boundaries quietly communicate self-respect and inner control. What makes this psychologically powerful is that emotional energy influences every interaction. People unconsciously feel when someone is emotionally overwhelmed, desperate, or internally unstable. But when a person remains emotionally balanced and grounded, their presence feels calmer, stronger, and harder to emotionally consume. This creates emotional contrast in a world where many individuals constantly leak their emotional state into every conversation. There is also a darker side to emotional protection. Manipulative people often search for emotionally available targets because emotionally exhausted individuals become easier to influence. The more drained someone becomes, the weaker their emotional judgment often grows. Protecting emotional energy, therefore, becomes a form of psychological defense against manipulation, guilt, and emotional control. Highly seductive and psychologically intelligent personalities understand this deeply. They know emotional access should not be given freely to everyone. The less emotionally exposed and drained you become, the more emotionally stable and valuable your presence begins to feel. People are strangely drawn toward individuals who seem emotionally centered because calm energy feels rare in an emotionally chaotic world. Keep some ambitions completely private. One of the most psychologically powerful habits a person can develop is learning to protect certain ambitions from public exposure. Most people announce their goals too early. They tell everyone about their plans, dreams, future success, and personal visions long before those things are real. On the surface, it feels exciting and motivating, but psychologically, revealing ambitions too openly often weakens them. Human beings unconsciously seek emotional validation when they share unfinished goals. The praise, attention, and approval they receive temporarily tricks the brain into feeling accomplished before any real progress has happened. This creates dangerous emotional comfort. Instead of quietly building discipline, many people become addicted to talking about who they are going to become. A person who keeps some ambitions private creates a completely different psychological effect. Their growth happens silently. While others constantly perform their goals publicly, they move quietly, without needing attention or reassurance. This restraint creates mystery because people cannot fully track their evolution. One day they simply appear transformed, more skilled, more successful, more disciplined, or more powerful than before. What makes this emotionally intense is that hidden ambition carries a strange psychological energy. Someone working towards something privately often appears calmer, more focused, and less emotionally dependent on outside validation. Their silence suggests inner certainty. Instead of trying to convince others of their future value, they allow results to reveal themselves naturally over time. There is also a darker reality beneath this principle. The more people know about your ambitions, the more access they gain to your emotional vulnerabilities, fears, and unfinished identity. Jealousy, doubt, criticism, or subtle discouragement can slowly poison momentum. This is why emotionally intelligent and highly disciplined individuals often protect their deepest goals carefully. Silence becomes psychological armor. The less people know about what you are building internally, the harder it becomes for outside opinions to emotionally interfere with your direction. Stay patient instead of emotionally impulsive. One of the most frightening forms of emotional control is patience. Most people react immediately to whatever they feel. Anger becomes instant confrontation. Attraction becomes desperate pursuit. Fear becomes panic. Rejection becomes emotional collapse. Human beings are naturally impulsive when emotions take over because emotional intensity creates urgency inside the mind. The problem is that impulsive reactions often expose weakness, insecurity, and vulnerability faster than anything else. A person who remains patient during emotional situations creates a completely different psychological effect. Instead of reacting instantly, they pause. They observe. They allow emotions to settle before making decisions or revealing what they truly feel. This calm restraint becomes deeply unsettling because most people expect immediate emotional responses. When someone refuses to react impulsively, they appear emotionally grounded and difficult to control. What makes patience so psychologically powerful is that emotional impulsiveness gives others information. The moment you react instantly, people learn exactly what triggers you, what hurts you, and what controls your emotions. But patience interrupts that process. A calm person becomes harder to read because they do not expose their inner state immediately. There is also a darker side to emotional patience. Many manipulative and socially intelligent individuals understand that the person who reacts less emotionally often gains more psychological control in interactions. While impulsive people become consumed by emotion, the patient observer quietly studies behavior, intentions, insecurities, and weaknesses before responding carefully. Patience also creates emotional tension. When people cannot immediately predict your reaction, they become psychologically restless. They start watching you more closely, trying to understand what you truly think or feel beneath the surface. The unsettling truth is that emotional impulsiveness often hands power away instantly, while patience quietly keeps that power hidden and protected. Use calm facial expressions during pressure. One of the most psychologically intimidating abilities a person can develop is maintaining calm facial expressions under pressure. Most human beings unconsciously reveal their emotions through their face almost instantly. Fear tightens the eyes. Anxiety creates tension around the mouth. Anger hardens the jaw. Nervousness appears through forced smiles, rapid blinking, or restless expressions. Because facial reactions expose emotional states so quickly, people naturally study faces to understand who feels confident and who is losing control. A person who remains visually calm during stressful situations creates a completely different psychological effect. Their composure feels unnatural compared to everyone else's emotional reactions. While others panic, overreact, or visibly crack under tension, the calm individual appears emotionally grounded and difficult to destabilize. This immediately changes the emotional balance in the room. What makes this psychologically powerful is that humans instinctively associate emotional stillness with inner strength. Even if the calm person feels pressure internally, the absence of visible panic creates the illusion of control. Others begin questioning themselves instead. They wonder what the calm person knows, what they are truly thinking, or why the situation does not seem to affect them emotionally. There is also a darker side to this behavior. Calm facial control makes emotional intentions harder to read, and uncertainty creates discomfort. When people cannot clearly detect fear, insecurity, or weakness in your expression, they often become more cautious around you. Emotional unpredictability increases because your face no longer gives others immediate access to your internal state. Interrogators, negotiators, manipulators, and highly dominant personalities understand this deeply. They know emotional reactions reveal vulnerability, while calm expressions create psychological pressure. The more composed your face remains during chaos, the more emotionally unsettled others often become around you. Make people feel emotionally seen. One of the deepest emotional desires human beings carry is the need to feel truly seen. Most people spend their lives hiding parts of themselves from the world. They hide insecurity behind confidence, sadness behind humor, loneliness behind busyness, and emotional pain behind carefully controlled behavior. Even in relationships, many individuals feel misunderstood because others only notice the version they present on the surface. A person who makes others feel emotionally seen creates an unusually powerful psychological effect. They notice emotional details most people ignore. They recognize hesitation behind someone's smile, exhaustion behind forced positivity, or insecurity hidden beneath arrogance. Instead of only hearing words, they pay attention to emotional patterns, subtle reactions, tone changes, and unspoken emotions. This makes people feel strangely understood without fully knowing why. What makes this psychologically intense is that emotional recognition creates instant emotional connection. The moment someone feels that another person truly understands them beneath their social mask, emotional defenses begin weakening. They feel relief because they no longer have to perform constantly. For many people, this experience feels rare enough to become emotionally addictive. There is also a darker psychological side to this ability. The more accurately you understand someone's emotional wounds, fears, and hidden desires, the easier it becomes to influence them. Manipulators, interrogators, therapists, and highly seductive personalities often rely on emotional observation because people naturally trust those who seem to understand them deeply. The unsettling truth is that most people are not starving for attention nearly as much as they are starving for emotional recognition. They want someone to notice the parts of themselves they never fully explain aloud. A person who makes others feel emotionally visible often becomes unforgettable because being deeply understood can feel more intimate than affection itself. Understand the psychology of anticipation. One of the most addictive emotional experiences in human psychology is anticipation. Strange as it sounds, people often become more emotionally consumed by what might happen than by what is actually happening. The human mind is naturally drawn toward uncertainty, possibility, and emotional suspense. This is why waiting for a message can feel more intense than receiving it, why unresolved tension keeps people awake at night, and why the imagination often creates stronger emotions than reality itself. A person who understands anticipation learns how emotional tension grows through delayed emotional reward. Most people destroy anticipation by becoming too available, too predictable, or emotionally excessive. They reveal everything immediately, respond instantly to every emotion, and remove all uncertainty from interactions. While this may create temporary comfort, it often weakens emotional intensity because the brain no longer needs to wonder. Someone who uses anticipation differently creates a completely different psychological effect. They allow emotional space to exist naturally. Conversations do not always feel emotionally complete. Their attention comes with rhythm instead of constant predictability. Silence, pauses, distance, and subtle restraint begin creating emotional momentum beneath the surface. This keeps the mind emotionally engaged long after the interaction ends. What makes anticipation so psychologically dangerous is that the brain becomes obsessed with unfinished emotional patterns. Human beings constantly seek emotional closure. When uncertainty remains unresolved, thoughts become repetitive and emotionally consuming. People replay interactions repeatedly, searching for hidden meaning, emotional confirmation, or signs of future connection. Seductive personalities, storytellers, manipulators, and emotionally intelligent individuals understand this principle deeply. They know anticipation magnifies emotional experience because imagination becomes emotionally involved. The less emotionally predictable someone becomes, the more psychological space they occupy inside other people's minds. Sometimes the strongest emotional attachment is not created by what someone gives directly, but by what they make the mind continue expecting. Become difficult to emotionally replace. One of the most psychologically powerful things a person can become is emotionally unforgettable. Most people are easily replaced because their presence feels temporary, predictable, or emotionally shallow. They seek attention the same way everyone else does, speak the same way, react the same way, and offer connections that rarely go beyond surface-level interaction. Over time, people emotionally adjust to their absence without much difficulty. A person who becomes difficult to emotionally replace creates a completely different impact. Their presence feels distinct. They make others feel understood, emotionally safe, deeply stimulated, or strangely alive in ways that are difficult to recreate elsewhere. Human beings do not become attached only to appearance or attraction. They become attached to emotional experiences they cannot easily find again. What makes this psychologically intense is that the brain constantly compares new experiences to meaningful past ones. Once someone associates you with emotional depth, comfort, excitement, peace, or understanding, future interactions with others may begin feeling emotionally incomplete by comparison. Your absence quietly remains present inside their mind because they keep searching for the emotional effect you once created. There is also a darker layer beneath this dynamic. People become hardest to replace when they connect to hidden emotional needs others rarely touch. A person who understands someone's loneliness, fears, insecurities, ambitions, or emotional wounds deeply can create an attachment that goes far beyond ordinary attraction. The connection begins feeling personal, almost irreplaceable. Manipulative and seductive personalities often understand this deeply. They know emotional attachment strengthens when someone feels uniquely understood rather than generically admired. This is why some individuals remain in people's minds for years, even after very little actual time together. The frightening truth is that people rarely obsess over what was ordinary. They obsess over what felt emotionally rare, never appear too available all the time. One of the most psychologically powerful forms of attraction is controlled availability. Most people make themselves constantly accessible because they fear losing attention, connection, or importance in someone's life. They reply instantly every time, always adjust their schedule, constantly seek interaction, and remain emotionally present no matter how little effort they receive in return. Over time, this endless availability quietly reduces emotional value because the human mind adapts quickly to what feels permanently accessible. A person who never appears too available creates a completely different psychological effect. Their presence feels intentional rather than desperate. They have their own priorities, routines, emotional boundaries, and private world that does not revolve entirely around other people. Because of this, their attention feels more meaningful when it is given. Human beings naturally place higher emotional value on things they cannot access endlessly. What makes this psychologically intense is that slight distance creates anticipation. When someone is not constantly reachable, people begin thinking about them more during their absence. The mind becomes emotionally active, searching for certainty, attention, or reassurance. Curiosity quietly grows because unpredictability keeps emotional focus alive. There is also a darker side to this dynamic. Constant availability often signals emotional dependence, while controlled availability signals emotional independence. The less desperate you appear for connection, the more psychologically intriguing you often become. People start questioning where your attention goes when it is not focused on them, and that uncertainty creates emotional tension. Seductive personalities, manipulators, and highly influential individuals understand this deeply. They know unlimited access weakens emotional intensity, while selective presence strengthens it. The less emotionally available you appear all the time, the more your presence can begin feeling rare, valuable, and psychologically difficult to fully possess. Keep your reactions measured and intentional. One of the strongest forms of psychological control is the ability to manage your reactions instead of letting emotions control them for you. Most people react instantly to everything around them. A small insult changes their mood. A delayed message creates anxiety. Criticism triggers defensiveness. Praise creates emotional highs. Their emotional state constantly shifts based on external events, which quietly gives other people influence over their inner world. A person who keeps their reactions measured creates a completely different emotional effect. Instead of reacting impulsively, they pause, observe, and choose their response carefully. This calmness immediately changes how others perceive them because emotional control feels rare in a world driven by emotional impulsiveness. People often mistake measured behavior for hidden strength, intelligence, or authority. What makes this psychologically powerful is that reactions reveal vulnerability. The faster and more emotionally someone reacts, the easier it becomes to identify what controls them emotionally. Manipulators understand this deeply. They provoke reactions intentionally to expose insecurity, fear, anger, jealousy, or emotional weakness. The moment someone loses emotional control publicly, they reveal more about themselves than they intended. There is also a darker side to measured reactions. Calm restraint creates uncertainty in other people's minds. When someone cannot easily predict how you feel or what affects you emotionally, they begin watching you more carefully. Your emotional control silently shifts the power dynamic because you are no longer emotionally easy to read or influence. Highly seductive, charismatic, and psychologically dominant personalities often master this skill. They know true influence rarely comes from emotional explosions. It comes from remaining composed while others become reactive. The unsettling truth is that people are often controlled less by events themselves and more by their inability to control their reactions to those events. Learn how emotional contrast increases attraction. One of the most overlooked truths about human psychology is that emotions become stronger through contrast. People rarely notice emotional experiences that remain constant all the time. Attention loses intensity when it becomes predictable. Affection loses impact when it is endlessly available. Even excitement fades when there is no emotional variation. The human brain is designed to notice change, contrast, and emotional shifts more than emotional consistency alone. This is why emotional contrast plays such a powerful role in attraction. A person who is always available, always predictable, and emotionally identical every moment often becomes psychologically easy to process. There is no tension, uncertainty, or emotional movement, but someone whose presence creates shifts between closeness and distance, intensity and calmness, warmth and restraint, often leaves a much deeper emotional imprint. What makes this psychologically dangerous is that contrast intensifies emotional memory. Human beings remember emotional highs more strongly when they are separated by moments of absence, silence, uncertainty, or emotional restraint. The brain becomes more emotionally alert during changes in emotional rhythm. Small moments suddenly feel amplified because they are not constantly available. There is also a darker side beneath this principle. Many manipulative and seductive personalities intentionally use emotional contrast to create attachment. They understand that inconsistency can increase emotional obsession because uncertainty keeps the brain searching for emotional resolution. Moments of warmth, followed by distance, often create stronger emotional fixation than constant affection ever could. Emotionally intelligent individuals understand this effect differently. They recognize that healthy attraction naturally contains rhythm, space, and emotional variation. Constant emotional exposure weakens tension over time. Controlled emotional contrast, however, keeps interactions psychologically alive because the mind continues emotionally responding to the shifts. The human brain rarely becomes addicted to what feels endlessly predictable. It becomes emotionally attached to what creates emotional movement, anticipation, and contrast beneath the surface. Build mystery through discipline, not manipulation. One of the most misunderstood forms of attraction is mystery. Most people think mystery comes from playing mind games, sending mixed signals, hiding emotions, or manipulating attention. But artificial mystery usually feels unstable over time. It creates confusion, emotional exhaustion, and distrust. Real mystery comes from something much quieter and far more powerful: discipline. A disciplined person naturally becomes difficult to fully understand because they are emotionally controlled, selective, and intentional. They do not reveal every thought immediately. They do not react impulsively to every emotion. They move carefully instead of constantly seeking attention or validation. This creates an unusual psychological effect because most people are emotionally loud without realizing it. Their insecurities, desperation, anger, and emotional needs leak into every interaction. Someone with discipline creates emotional contrast. They stay calm when others become reactive. They maintain boundaries when others overshare. They remain focused while others constantly seek stimulation and approval. Because of this, people begin sensing hidden depth beneath the surface. The mystery does not come from deception. It comes from self-control. What makes this psychologically powerful is that disciplined people feel emotionally solid. Others cannot easily manipulate their moods, predict their reactions, or force emotional exposure from them. This stability creates fascination because human beings are naturally drawn toward what feels emotionally rare and difficult to shake. There is also a darker side to this. Most manipulative personalities rely heavily on emotional chaos. They create confusion to gain control. But disciplined individuals quietly disrupt that dynamic because they refuse to become emotionally consumed by games, pressure, or attention tactics. Highly seductive and psychologically influential people often understand this deeply. The strongest presence in a room is rarely the loudest or most dramatic person. It is often the one who remains emotionally disciplined while everyone else loses control around them. Stay emotionally balanced when others panic. One of the most psychologically commanding traits a person can possess is emotional balance during chaos. Most human beings absorb panic from the people around them without realizing it. Fear spreads quickly through tone, facial expressions, rushed decisions, and emotional reactions. The moment tension enters a situation, many people lose clarity and begin reacting emotionally instead of thinking clearly. This is why calmness under pressure immediately stands out. A person who stays emotionally balanced while others panic creates a deeply unsettling psychological effect. While everyone else becomes emotionally overwhelmed, they remain steady, controlled, and difficult to shake. Their voice stays calm. Their movements remain measured. Their emotions do not spill outward uncontrollably. This creates the impression that they possess inner stability others suddenly realize they lack. What makes this psychologically powerful is that human beings instinctively look toward emotional anchors during stressful situations. When fear spreads through a group, people unconsciously search for the person who appears most emotionally grounded. Calmness begins feeling like authority. Even without speaking much, the emotionally balanced person quietly influences the emotional atmosphere around them. There is also a darker psychological side to this behavior. Emotional balance under pressure can feel intimidating because it becomes difficult to tell what truly affects the person internally. While others visibly crack under stress, the calm individual appears emotionally protected from the chaos consuming everyone else. This uncertainty creates fascination, caution, and sometimes fear. Leaders, interrogators, manipulative personalities, and highly influential individuals understand this deeply. They know panic reveals vulnerability, while emotional balance creates psychological control. The calmer you remain during emotional storms, the more others begin trusting your presence while simultaneously feeling unsettled by how difficult you are to emotionally destabilize. Make your words precise and memorable. One of the most underestimated forms of psychological influence is the ability to speak with precision. Most people talk excessively without realizing how quickly too many words weaken emotional impact. They over-explain, repeat themselves, fill silence with unnecessary details, and speak impulsively without intention. As a result, their words blur together and disappear from memory almost immediately. A person who speaks precisely creates a completely different emotional effect. Their words feel controlled, deliberate, and emotionally sharp. Instead of flooding conversations with endless explanations, they choose statements carefully and allow them to land with emotional weight. This naturally makes people pay closer attention because precision signals confidence and self-control rather than nervousness or emotional desperation. What makes this psychologically powerful is that the human mind remembers emotional impact more than quantity. A single carefully chosen sentence can stay in someone's thoughts for years if it touches fear, desire, insecurity, curiosity, or emotional truth deeply enough. People rarely remember long speeches word for word, but they remember phrases that made them feel exposed, understood, challenged, or emotionally unsettled. There is also a darker side to precise language. Manipulators, interrogators, charismatic leaders, and seductive personalities often use carefully crafted words to quietly influence emotions and perception. They understand that emotionally charged phrases can shape how people think, feel, and even remember experiences. The fewer unnecessary words they use, the stronger each statement often becomes psychologically. Precise speech also creates mystery. When someone says only what is necessary, others begin filling the silence with their own thoughts and interpretations. This increases emotional engagement because the brain naturally searches for deeper meaning beneath controlled language. The unsettling truth is that people often reveal weakness through excessive talking, while controlled words create the impression of hidden depth, emotional discipline, and psychological power. Let confidence show through body language. One of the first things human beings judge is not words, but physical presence. Before someone even speaks, the brain is already analyzing posture, eye contact, movement, facial tension, and overall emotional energy. Body language often reveals emotional truth faster than speech because the body reacts instinctively, while words can be carefully controlled. This is why insecurity frequently leaks through nervous gestures, restless movement, weak posture, or avoidance behaviors without the person realizing it. A person who lets confidence show naturally through body language creates a completely different psychological effect. They move calmly instead of rushing. Their posture remains relaxed rather than tense. Their eye contact feels steady without appearing aggressive. They do not constantly seek permission through nervous smiles or excessive reactions. This quiet physical composure signals emotional control before a single word is spoken. What makes body language so psychologically powerful is that human beings unconsciously respond to emotional certainty. Calm physical behavior creates the impression of inner stability, competence, and self-respect. Even silence feels different around someone whose body language appears grounded and controlled. People instinctively pay closer attention because confident physical presence communicates emotional security without needing verbal proof. There is also a darker layer beneath this principle. Manipulators, interrogators, seductive personalities, and dominant individuals often study body language carefully because physical behavior exposes hidden emotional states. Fear, attraction, insecurity, anxiety, and desperation frequently appear through unconscious movements long before words reveal them. Someone who controls their body language effectively becomes much harder to emotionally read or psychologically destabilize. The most unsettling part is that genuine confidence rarely tries to look confident. Forced dominance often appears exaggerated, loud, or performative. Real confidence feels quieter. It appears through stillness, controlled movement, relaxed posture, and emotional calmness. The less someone needs to physically prove power, the more psychologically powerful they often appear to everyone around them. Stop seeking instant emotional gratification. One of the most dangerous emotional addictions people develop is the need for immediate relief. Most human beings struggle to sit with uncertainty, loneliness, rejection, boredom, silence, or emotional discomfort for very long. The moment painful emotions appear, they search for something to escape into. Attention, texting, validation, social media, impulsive relationships, emotional reactions, or constant stimulation become temporary emotional drugs meant to quiet the discomfort inside. A person who stops seeking instant emotional gratification becomes psychologically different from most people around them. Instead of reacting immediately to every feeling, they learn how to tolerate emotional tension without rushing to escape it. They do not chase reassurance the second they feel insecure. They do not impulsively seek attention the moment they feel lonely. This emotional patience creates an unsettling sense of inner control. What makes this psychologically powerful is that emotional impulsiveness often exposes vulnerability. The faster someone needs relief, the easier they become to manipulate. People who desperately crave validation, affection, or attention can often be controlled simply by giving or withholding those things. Their emotions become dependent on external reactions. But someone who can calmly sit with discomfort becomes far more difficult to influence. They no longer make desperate emotional decisions just to feel temporary relief. Instead of reacting emotionally in the moment, they observe their feelings without immediately obeying them. This creates emotional stability that most people secretly lack. There is also a darker truth beneath this. Many manipulative and seductive personalities understand that emotionally impulsive people are easier to trap psychologically. They know instant gratification weakens discipline and clouds judgment. The frightening reality is that the people hardest to emotionally control are usually the ones who no longer need immediate emotional rewards to feel whole. Become genuinely passionate about your own life. One of the most magnetically attractive qualities a person can develop is genuine passion for their own life. Most people unconsciously build their emotional world around external validation, relationships, attention, or the opinions of others. Their happiness depends heavily on being chosen, noticed, or emotionally reassured. Because of this, they often appear emotionally empty when left alone with themselves. A person who becomes deeply invested in their own growth, interests, routines, goals, and inner world creates a completely different psychological effect. Their energy feels alive instead of dependent. They are emotionally engaged with life itself rather than constantly searching for someone else to complete them. Human beings are naturally drawn toward people who already seem internally fulfilled because emotional independence feels rare and powerful. What makes this psychologically intense is that genuine passion creates emotional gravity. When someone truly enjoys their own life, others begin sensing that their attention is not easily controlled or emotionally bought. They are not desperately chasing connection because their identity already has direction, meaning, and emotional depth outside of other people. This creates intrigue because emotionally fulfilled individuals become harder to manipulate through approval or attention. There is also a darker psychological side to this dynamic. Passionate people often become unconsciously addictive because they make others feel the emotional intensity missing from their own lives. Their focus, purpose, and emotional energy create contrast against people who feel lost, numb, or directionless. Others begin craving access to that energy without fully understanding why it affects them so deeply. Seductive personalities, influential leaders, and emotionally powerful individuals understand this principle well. They know desperation weakens attraction, while genuine engagement with life strengthens it. The more emotionally connected you become to your own purpose and existence, the more others begin feeling emotionally pulled toward your presence naturally. Learn the power of emotional patience. One of the rarest psychological abilities a person can develop is emotional patience. Most people are emotionally impulsive without realizing it. They want immediate replies, immediate reassurance, immediate attention, immediate results, and immediate emotional certainty. The moment they feel ignored, uncertain, rejected, or emotionally uncomfortable, anxiety begins controlling their behavior. They rush conversations, force emotional clarity, and make impulsive decisions simply to escape emotional tension. A person with emotional patience creates a completely different emotional presence. They do not panic during uncertainty. They allow emotions, situations, and people to reveal themselves naturally over time, instead of forcing outcomes prematurely. This calmness becomes psychologically powerful because patience signals emotional stability rather than emotional desperation. What makes emotional patience so unsettling is that it gives a person enormous psychological control over themselves. While others become reactive under emotional pressure, the patient individual remains observant and grounded. They understand that emotions often distort judgment in the moment. Instead of reacting impulsively, they wait, watch patterns carefully, and allow hidden truths to surface naturally. There is also a darker side to emotional patience. Manipulative and psychologically dominant personalities often understand that impatient people are easier to control. Emotional urgency weakens decision-making. People who desperately need answers, affection, validation, or certainty become more vulnerable to manipulation because their emotions overpower their judgment. The person who can tolerate emotional uncertainty quietly gains an advantage others do not notice. They are less likely to reveal desperation, emotional weakness, or impulsive vulnerability. This creates the impression of inner strength, emotional depth, and psychological discipline. The unsettling truth is that many people destroy relationships, opportunities, and emotional control not because they lacked intelligence, but because they lacked the patience to let emotions settle before reacting to them. Avoid trying too hard to be liked. One of the most psychologically damaging habits a person can develop is the constant need to be liked by everyone. Many people spend their lives unconsciously shaping their personality around approval. They laugh too quickly, agree too often, over-explain themselves, hide their real opinions, and tolerate disrespect simply to avoid rejection. On the surface, this behavior appears friendly and harmless, but underneath it usually comes from fear. The fear of not being accepted, valued, or emotionally chosen. What makes this dangerous is that people can instinctively sense desperation for approval. The more someone tries too hard to be liked, the more emotionally predictable they become. Their behavior starts feeling performative instead of authentic. Instead of creating respect, excessive people-pleasing often weakens attraction because others no longer feel they are interacting with someone emotionally grounded. They feel they are interacting with someone adapting constantly for validation. A person who stops chasing approval creates a completely different psychological effect. They remain respectful and emotionally aware, but they no longer shape their entire identity around pleasing others. They are comfortable disagreeing calmly. They do not panic when someone dislikes them. They stop overperforming for acceptance. This emotional self-assurance often feels deeply attractive because it signals inner stability and self-respect. There is also a darker psychological reality beneath this principle. Human beings naturally place higher emotional value on people who appear selective with their energy and attention. Someone who does not desperately seek universal approval feels more emotionally difficult to control. Their presence feels more genuine because their behavior is not constantly bending around fear of rejection. Manipulative and emotionally intelligent individuals understand this deeply. They know people who desperately need to be liked are often easier to influence through praise, attention, or emotional validation. The moment someone becomes emotionally comfortable with not pleasing everyone, they quietly become harder to manipulate and far more psychologically powerful.